Hello, and welcome to episode 419 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Perrin, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. And with me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody, former skipper of the fast attack submarine USS Indianapolis, Commodore Submarine Squadron 3 in Pearl Harbor, and many others. How are you September 24th, 2024, Bill?
I'm doing great. I'm speaking about the Indianapolis tonight, and I'm always pleased to do that at the Veterans Memorial in Brevard County, Florida.
Excellent, excellent. And with us, as usual, is the third member of our crew, and we are always happy to have him, Jon Parshall. How are you, our good buddy Jon? How are you, buddy?
I am well, thank you. Yeah, working away on maps for your former employer and getting ready to take an all-day bike trip with the wifo tomorrow at the coolest bike trail in Minnesota, the Root River Trail, which is
That's awesome.
Beautiful.
That is awesome.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's got to be fixing the snow in Minnesota already, isn't it?
It's cooling down. I mean, no, we typically don't get snow until next month, but yeah, the trajectory is clear.
That early?
It's happened, yeah.
October.
Really?
Yeah, it's happened.
Yeah, we had way back, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, there was a Halloween blizzard that dumped 18 inches on the cities. That was bogus.
That's me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway.
Here we go. All right. So L Day, Love Day on Okinawa was set for April the 1st, 1945, which in 1945 was both Easter Sunday and April Fool's Day. A most appropriate day to be sure, because the landings that occurred on the western side of Okinawa on that day were in no way a resemblance of the bloodbath they had been predicted to be. The assault, which had been forecasted to be an Iwo Jima-esque storm of steel, was anything but. Soldiers of the 96th Infantry Division landing on the southernmost beaches next to their brothers in the 7th ID just north of them, followed still by the Gyrenes of the old breed and the men of the 6th Marine Division further north, encountered little to no resistance when their boots hit the beaches. Quite the opposite. The unopposed landings astonished American leadership, including but not limited to Kelly Turner, who said that, quote, "I may be crazy, but it looks like the Japanese have quit the war, at least in this sector," unquote. Men up and down the beaches, from private to general, all were flabbergasted at the easy time they had had so far in the Okinawa campaign. The Marines pushed north, clearing what paltry resistance was encountered while simultaneously riding Okinawan horses, playing football, and for all intents and purposes, enjoying a good life with easy duty. To the south, the Army divisions also moved rapidly, securing objectives in hours that were initially slated for capture days after the landings. Turning south, the GIs advanced rapidly and ran into slowly stiffening opposition that still baffled American leadership. Army leaders discussed the question as to whether the Japanese, if they were still on Okinawa in any sizable force, would even fight if they were ever found. As the dog faces of the 96th Infantry Division would soon find out, the Japanese most certainly were still on Okinawa, and they most certainly would fight when found. Perched in the high ground south of the 96th line of advance, Japanese General Officers Ushijima, Cho, and Colonel Yahara watched the American advance approach from their first line of to their first line of defense. The iceberg that was the Japanese defensive plan on Okinawa would reveal itself very, very soon, guys. It's about, if you watched last week's episode, you know how it ended. It's about to hit the fan, as the saying goes. Yes, it is. So on April 3rd, 24th Corps Commanding General John Hodge ordered a full-scale race to the south for his leading Army elements, while the 1st Marine Division and 6th Marine Division made their way north to clean up the island in that area. Hodge gave the mission of capturing a dominating slice of high ground to the 96th Infantry. The 7th was to move towards Hill 178 near the same area and capture it as well. What, guys, I think we need to explain is how fast these units are moving right now. They are flying through these what was supposed to be stiff opposition, and there's nothing there. So, as I was saying, it's the GIs, and it's not just the GIs, but for for this episode's sake. It is the GIs. They're moving rapidly. They're moving through, and as you said, John, they're not getting tens of miles, but they're capturing places that had been, slated for days later on their line of advance. They're capturing them within hours, 72 hours. They're
Yep.
picking up the pace here, and they're moving forward, pretty much whenever they and however they want at this stage.
Yep. Yeah, they're pushing the recon elements down various roads at this point. So you're talking half tracks, armored cars, that kind of stuff. Nothing super, super heavy. And we've now left sort of the curve of the bay where the invasion beaches were, and we're now curving down to the southwest. And I think Bill has a map for us here if we wanted to put it up there. But we're going to be driving down the coastal road, which is highway number one, to this little village called Nishiki. And off to the left of Nishiki is a place called Cactus Ridge. And Cactus Ridge is an outpost of what we're going to be talking about a lot, which is Kakazu Ridge, which is just to the southwest of there. So what we're running into now is this first belt of these ridges that run roughly west to east, but it's really more like northwest down to southeast across the narrowest point of this island. And uh, this quick advance is now going to run out of steam here real quick. Take it away, Seth.
Yeah, it's going to hit a brick wall is what it's going to do. And this is exactly to your point. This is the first line, planned line of Japanese defenses. And to be 100% clear, there were pockets, for
Yep.
lack of a better term, of Japanese that we had run into even on L Day, nothing of any sizable force, mind you, but there were Japanese that we did run into. But this is the first line of
Yep.
defense that Yahara had planned, that Ushijima had authorized, and that of course Cho, bristles at and everything else. When
Yep.
we covered that, and we'll get into that again here in a little bit.
Yep.
But so on April the 4th, leading elements of the 96th Recon Troop, exactly to your point, received orders to move down a road and observe potential enemy positions towards the small village of Chatan or Chatan.
Shatan.
Um, the convoy of scout vehicles proceeded down Okinawa's Route 1, just like you were saying. The column consists of half tracks, an M8 scout car named the Reluctant Virgin. And you gotta love those names, man. They're awesome. They're Jesus, and a handful of jeeps. The men were to recon the area for the following infantry advance that would occur within hours. Now, Bill, at around 0500 that morning, the convoy reaches this Nishiki that John was talking about and halted. What goes on from here?
Yes, Seth. So the captain in charge, his name is Robert O'Neill, orders a halt to consult his maps. To their immediate left was high ground of Cactus Ridge, which zigged and zagged its way towards their objective, a place marked on maps as Kakazu Ridge. O'Neill told his lead recon men to move down what amounted to a cow trail and on foot move into the hilly area and see what they could find. Corporal John Kane was the lead scout. As he scrambled up the slope of a wooded hill, he came to a crest and looked down. What he saw made him hold his breath. Beneath him, he saw dozens of Japanese, tons of Japanese, hauling weapons and equipment to what he assumed were camouflage gun positions. Now, hauling ass back down the hill, as he reported what he had seen, estimating the enemy strength to be in excess of 150 men, much larger than his recon unit. Kane was told by his CO to take the M8 scout car and the half tracks and wipe the Japanese out. Oh, easier said than done, guys. Kane tried to argue. He tried to argue that the vehicles would be obliterated. These are lightly, not even armored, soft shell vehicles, but he was ignored. Orders were orders, Seth. So this is not looking good for Corporal Kane right now.
Not at all. And we're singling this out because this is not the first instance that we run into to the main line of Japanese defense, but this is a perfect example of the lack of understanding of what we're going to run into
Yeah.
and the strength of what we're going to run into. And to put it in clarity here, the half track it's an armored vehicle, but I mean, A
It's
30 caliber round will go through an AP round will go through a half track, it'll
APM, maybe
ding
it
around in
depends.
there.
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly not proof against anything much
Mm-mm,
heavier than that. And so,
mm-mm.
yeah, I mean, what's happening here simultaneously across this line is both 96th and 7th ID are going to be putting their feelers out as they're moving to the southwest. And yeah, all of them pretty much around this day start running into similar sorts of episodes where the
Yep.
recon elements are taking fire and are brusquely rejected from their any further forward advance. And yeah,
They are dispatched. Yes,
they are
they are dispatched.
dispatched.
So Kane and his squad leader consult because Kane is the one that saw what he saw, and he tells his squad leader, "Is like, hey, Jackson, there's a lot of bad guys on the other side of this hill over here. Probably ought to be relatively careful when we go in. But as Bill said, orders are orders, and they got to do what they're told regardless. They did try to fight and say, maybe we not send the vehicles through there because what it amounted to was a small valley in between two hills that these vehicles were going to roll into.
Yep,
And when they rolled through this little cut, they're
yep,
going to roll into an open field that
yep.
is surrounded in almost like a football stadium kind of like thing,
What
literally
he's
surrounded like a yeah,
Yeah, he's pushing his squad basically off of Route One, taking a left, heading southwest down into behind Cactus Ridge and in front of Kakazu, and
correct.
into the dead ground that's between the two of those things. And of course, Cactus is still manned at this point, so this is not going to end well. And indeed, it does not.
It does not, and dead ground being the key term there.
Yeah,
So they put the half tracks first, which, by the way, are filled with infantry, and they reluctantly move into the valley between these two ridges. The first half track actually moved forward, followed by Canes, and the M8 scout car brings up the rear. The M8 is, as Bill said, it's a very lightly armored vehicle with a 37 millimeter main gun in it, and that's it. As he crested the ridge and began to move down into the valley that John was talking about, the men actually held their breath. They knew it was like this is not going to be good. Where moments before, 100 or so, 150 or so Japanese were, there wasn't anybody there now. Like a ghost, there was absolutely nothing. As the first track moved into the valley floor, Kane, off to his left, noticed a flash and a white puff of smoke from his left. What is that? That's an AT. In an instant, the lead half track was hit three times by a Japanese anti-tank gun in rapid succession. Boom, boom, boom. Track rolled to a stop, and the men poured out poured out into a gully. More AT rounds hit the half track, and it burst into flames. Machine gun fire, mortars, more AT fire poured in on the GIs that were either taking cover or desperately reversing their vehicles to get the hell out of there as quickly as they could. The men in Kane's half track returned fire as the driver tried to turn the vehicle around. The M8 scout car pulls in there, starts popping 37 millimeter rounds at where he thinks that AT round is. And by the way, it gets hit as well. The driver of Kane's half track jumps out, staggers a few feet, then falls dead. The ridge in front of the column was clearly fortified by the Japanese, and they had expertly ambushed the American column as it rolled into this killing field. And they're now picking these guys apart man by man. And this is just, again, this is not the first time this happens on the island, but this is a harbinger of things to come. And it's a good example of all of our armored might. We're going to see how that turns out here in the very near future. um, Bill, tell us about, is it Kakazu or is it Kakazu Ridge?
Either way, you just want to keep your pronunciation flat. Kakazu, Kakazu,
Okay,
whatever.
I got you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and
Bill,
it's here,
what you got
guys.
the map up here? Show us what you got.
Yeah, this is Kakazu Ridge right here, and the little
Yep.
village behind it. All right,
Yep.
so this is
And
what
then
they're running into. Go ahead,
Yep, that's
go ahead,
exactly
Clyde.
right. And you can see Cactus Ridge is off to the northeast there as well, up in the top right hand corner of the map. That's where Cactus Ridge is up in there. Yeah, Kakazu is an interesting little feature. I've been there twice, and it's not all that high. It's only about 100 feet high, but it's got a village right behind it. And so that village is essentially in the reverse slope of this ridge. And gee willikers, the village is full of Japanese machine guns and direct fire weapons and whatnot that are dug in there. And the feature itself is relatively steep. There's a very steep set of stairs that comes up the backside of it now But when you're standing on the top and you look down where the Americans are coming from, I mean, you're looking down on the tops of trees. It's pretty precipitous. And yet at the same time, too, behind it and off of this map is an even higher escarpment that we're going to be talking about a little later on. The Maeda escarpment, which is also known as Hacksaw Ridge, which is considerably higher and commands this ground as well. So yeah, it's not a friendly place.
Mm. So the defenders of Kakazu are under the command of Colonel Hara Munatatsu. They had been digging and mining their defenses for months before the dead eyes of the 96th ID arrived. Supporting artillery and mortar positions have been carved up to 150 feet deep into the solid rock.
Yep.
That's freaking deep, man. Good
Really,
gravy.
yeah, it's really down there. And some of those tunnel entrances are still there today. You can see them where they go into the hill. So yeah, this is another one of these, absolutely honeycombed hills with all these interconnecting tunnels. And that's a feature of most of these ridge line defenses. You got the same thing at, further south of what's going to be Sugarloaf Hill, same thing on the next ridge over Nishibaru. This is just how the Japanese do things.
Its natural defense lay in its geography. And John, you're a geo major. You've been there. Tell us about some of the. I mean, there's gorges in between all this stuff, and and I wasn't making light of our armored superiority, but we're going to rely on tanks, and as we're going to see throughout this episode, tanks don't live very long on Okinawa because of these type of terrain features right here.
Right. That's the thing. Yeah, there's sort of a gorge, a really deep gorge right in front of Kakazu that makes maneuvering armor really difficult. There's a road that goes in between Kakazu and Nishibaru Ridge, which is down to off to the southeast. You can see that road kind of down in there. Yep. And so what ends up happening is in a lot of cases, our armor is going to get channelized onto these roads in order to make their approaches. And, that ain't good because, of course, the Japanese aren't stupid and they've sighted their AT weapons to command those roads. So that's problematic. And as I say, the geology here is mostly limestone. It's relatively soft. It's very easy to dig into. But if you're deep enough down in this thing, it's absolutely impervious to any sort of artillery or naval gunfire. Just as we saw, at Iwo Jima as well. These fortifications are dug down real deep and they're all interconnected.
Yeah. So, Bill, further American attacks pretty much have similar results, as did Corporal Kane's, venture, if you will, into the Valley of Death here, which is what it's going to be. Tell us about some of the actions that are going on after April the 6th.
Well, Seth, by April 6th, three infantry regiments from the 96th were exactly where they had started days before. No progress. Men of the 383rd Infantry Regiment had occupied Cactus Ridge the day before. That's the one to the northeast. But they had been driven off by heavy and accurate artillery fire. Like Kakazu, Cactus was part of the same defensive network, and its defenders were tied in tighter than a tick. And as you said, Seth, these things are in naval gunfire, as John said, naval gunfire, artillery is not going to work. If you get a kill shot right at the mouth of the tunnel, you could collapse the entrance and trap people inside. But the chances of that happening are like 1 in 1,000. So that did not happen, despite massive amounts of American artillery, airstrikes, naval gunfire. No ground had been gained until a small breakthrough occurred when small units of infantry began to peck their way up towards Cactus. That's two of the 383rd began to move up Cactus in dribs and drabs, taking the majority of a day to get towards the top. Japanese machine gun fire poured down on the Americans, but because of the elevation's steep angle and plenty of rocks, and we're going to talk a lot about steep ridges today, the infantry, for the most part, was safe from the enemy fire. Hanging on about halfway up the hill, the infantry dug in and waited to move until the next day, Seth.
Yeah, and the next morning, and this is always exhilarating, unless you're the one doing it. Two full companies of infantry fixed bayonets and charged up the hill like Civil War style, a la Gettysburg kind of thing
Yeah.
here,
Little round top.
Yeah, but on the other, but the good guys are charging up as opposed to the other way around, run,
Right.
running in waves, literally waves towards Japanese positions. The GIs apparently scared the bejesus out of the Japanese that were in those positions because the Japanese they skedaddled. They're like, nope, not today, and they turned around and got out of there, which
Yeah.
is not a very common occurrence,
No,
is it?
no, you don't see a lot of that here in the Pacific just in general.
Mm-mm.
So
Yeah, Major Prosser Clark's battalion, that's the guys who do this, killed more than 150 of the enemy in their charge, in just the charge, by the way, and the enemy's retreat as the Japanese are trying to get out of the way. The almost said the Marines, the infantry is up at the top of the ridge and they're picking these guys off as they're running off. At the end of the day, Cactus Ridge was theirs. Holding the ridge against Japanese artillery, the GIs beat down a Japanese night assault that tried to retake the hill, standard procedure for the Japanese here, killing an additional 58. Enemy artillery continued to pound the top of the ridge for the next 2 days. And again, and we'll get back to this in just a second. But the GIs now occupying Japanese positions could withstand the fire. The next day's assault on Kakazu, a mere 800 yards away, and I say mere, and I'm being very sarcastic here, to the southwest, it was hoped would bring the ridge into American hands. Hopes were optimistic. Now, for 2 days, the Japanese are pouring artillery fire in here. We talked about Japanese artillery fire on Saipan, and
yeah,
we talked about it in the beginning of Iwo Jima. But I mean, it
this
is here in spades.
yeah, this is in a different league. I was trying to go through the histories last night to find out just exactly how many artillery pieces they've got here on the island, but it looks like they've got north of 200 guns of 75 millimeter or larger. And it's interesting if you go to the Yushikan Museum today in Tokyo, there are still two 15 centimeter howitzers that were captured on Okinawa by the Americans and then later returned to the Japanese. So they've got a Type 96 howitzer, and they've also got one of these bigger. I can't remember what type it is, but it's the equivalent, it's the Japanese equivalent of the 155 millimeter long tom. It's a gun. So they're very dug in emplacements that are down around Shuri Castle. Most of the time, these artillery pieces are sitting in caves. The caves, in many cases, will have multiple entrances and multiple revetments. So the Japanese can run their gun out, pick a revetment, put it in there, fire a couple times, and then skedaddle it back to the cave. I was reading the U.S. Army Journal of Field Artillery. There was an article that was published in September of 1945, so just a few months after the battle ended, that was talking about how problematic these Japanese pieces were. They were very, very difficult to kill. By this point in the war, we have very good counter battery fire, either using flash locations, we can see the muzzle blast when their guns fire, or using sound to do the same thing. And the standard drill became that when we've got a suspected spot of a Japanese gun, we wait until it fires. And then we've got all these coordinates locked in with, two or three battalions of our
Right.
artillery sometimes. And they do a time on target mission, which means they all fire at staggered times to put the shells down at exactly the same time on the target. And that's what they would do to try to either kill these Japanese gun crews or at least make them push their weapon back into the cave and prevent them from firing. But yeah, throughout the initial month and a half or so of this campaign, the Japanese have extremely effective artillery fire that they can bring down on any of these threatened ridge outposts here. And it makes life very, very hairy for the Americans.
And that's a very important point to note. And again, I'm pounding on it because in most battles that we've talked about, while Japanese artillery is there, it's not there to this extent. And a lot of times when we capture these ridges, and we do multiple times,
Yeah,
it's the artillery
it
that drives us.
drives us
Yes,
off.
sure, we're taking machine gun fire and we're taking mortar fire, yes, but it's the artillery fire that makes our guys turn around and go, we got to get out of here. Because I
Yeah,
mean, this is artillery fire to the level, maybe not quite to the level, but close to some of the levels of artillery that we're experiencing in Europe. I mean, this is some
Right.
serious, significant fire. This is not a pittance. This isn't Pistol Pete on Guadalcanal.
No,
This is
no.
some serious fire.
Yeah, this is sustained fire that has been pre-registered on these objectives, and yeah, they know exactly how to bring it down. It's all being centrally controlled by, 32nd Army. So yeah, this is very hairy stuff. Um, we are going to progressively chip away at those assets.
Sure.
Again, our counter battery is extremely good. It's the best in the world, but it takes time to do that. It's a game of attrition, and it's not going to be really until June that the majority of the Japanese artillery in 32nd Army's park is going to be destroyed. And so, yeah, it's a real pain in these early fights. We, as you say, we capture the top of a ridge and immediately just get pissed on. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrible. So full-scale assault on Kakazu Ridge began on April the 9th. Bill, do you have the map ready for that one?
Yeah, let's do map
Yeah,
nine.
yeah, let's see this one here, right? So, no, this is 12. Sorry.
That's 12. You're
That's
good.
this one here.
Yeah, there we
Yeah,
There
go.
we go. Yeah.
yeah. So here's the Kakazu Ridge down here again,
And
and
the
this is
village
beginning
right
on April
behind
9th,
it. Yep.
right? Right
Full
here.
of machine guns and yeah, what have you. Yeah, it's a
And
mess. So as soon as we
yeah,
get up to the top of these ridges, yeah, it's bad news.
and I'm going
Pray
to stomp my
continue.
foot on something you said earlier, John, that the first month and a half of this campaign is a spoiler alert. This isn't going to be a quick victory.
No,
Mm-mm. No,
no.
no, this is going to go on for a while.
Yeah.
So by daybreak on April the 9th, three of four leading companies had men at the top of Kakazu and had suffered, surprisingly, light casualties. As the lead elements made their way up and over the hilltops, they came under withering fire from the Japanese on the reverse slope defenses on the other side of Kakazu. Unable to hold the position for long, and you're going to hear this a lot, the Americans tentatively began to withdraw under increasing Japanese fire. Japanese Colonel Hara, realizing that the American assault, and he was right, was probably weak, threw four counterattacks at the GIs during the daylight, mind you, as the GIs tried to move towards other Japanese positions. Japanese casualties were heavy, but they stopped the 96th attack, 96th attack in its very tracks.
Yeah.
And again, this is no fault of this division. The 96th is actually really good
Pretty good.
group of dudes, and so's
Yeah.
their guys on their flank. The 7th are outstanding. It's
Yep.
just the Japanese defenses in the area, and I mean, it's just they're running into a concrete wall, and this
Yeah.
is only the beginning here.
Yeah.
So, Bill, tell us about one of the companies that was isolated on and around the west end of Kakazu.
Yeah, Seth, I think you're talking about Lima Company, 2nd Battalion, 383rd, under the command of Willard Mitchell. Now, under fire and unable to retreat, Mitchell's men tried to dig in as grenades and mortars rained down around them. Mitchell believed that if his men could hold the saddle-like gorge he was stuck in, if the Japanese came at them, he might be able to inflict heavy damage. On time, the Japanese attacked, as he expected, throwing satchel charges and grenades on the GIs below, the advantage of having the high ground. Mitchell, who was nicknamed Hoss, stood up and charged the charging Japanese with his GIs right behind him. By 1600, Mitchell's men had repulsed several attacks, but were down to a handful of men who were effective. 17 of his men were dead, and a further 37 were wounded. Attempting to withdraw under fire, he required smoke to move out of his position, which he received, and he moved his men, much to his chagrin, out of what they had captured. So this is a very painful gain and even a more painful loss.
17 guys killed in one day out of that one company. That is, and 37 guys wounded.
Right.
That is not insignificant in any way, shape, or form
No.
for a company of infantry. That is serious.
Yeah.
That is serious.
Yeah.
So on the neighboring ridge, the similar kind of thing is second verse, same as the first, ensued. 1st Battalion 383 A and C companies were trapped on Kakazu and were absolutely being torn apart by Japanese fire. Captain Jack Royster's A Company was hit hard with Royster himself, being seriously wounded by Japanese mortar fire. He disobeyed an order to hold. Royster called in a smoke barrage that kept blowing in his face because the wind was blowing the wrong damn way. An hour later, he's been up there for an hour. An hour later, the smoke actually stuck when the wind died down, and it allowed these guys to pull back. Crawling down the slope on their bellies because of enemy fire, Royster's people dragged as many of their wounded with them as possible. One reason that Royster was able to retreat was a guy from Chicago named Edward Moskala. Moskala was a BAR man who had already knocked out two Japanese machine gun positions and volunteered to singularly cover his company's retreat. When Moskala reached safety below and learned of a wounded man that had been left behind, he took off on his own back up the hill and dragged the wounded man back. He did this three separate times alone, going through fire up and through fire back all the way. During his rescue missions, Moskala killed at least 25 of the enemy. He was killed, shielding his last man with his own body. He would be awarded the Medal of Honor. That is a bad human being right there,
Yeah.
Edward Moskala. So, as I put in the notes, despite the undeniable heroism and extreme sacrifice, the 96th attacks on Kakazu had all failed. And yes, they had taken ground, but they had to give it up. Not a single inch of ground had been retained, for the loss of 70 killed in action and a further 256 wounded in action just from the 383rd Infantry Regiment alone. Japanese casualties were estimated to be in the neighborhood of 600.
That's probably exaggerated, but it does show you that you are extracting equal or greater number of enemy casualties, despite the fact that the enemy is supposed to be dug in.
Right.
And as I mentioned a little bit later on, yeah, on the one hand, it's if you're the Japanese, of course you're going to try to counterattack and recapture this high ground, but there's only so many times that you want to do that before it becomes militarily unfruitful. And we're going to see this as a recurring pattern throughout this campaign. I'm actually going to I posit that Ushijima was a quality general, but he's not in the same league as our gentleman on Iwo Jima was,
Right.
Kurabayashi. Do I think he was in the same league as Colonel Nakagawa and Peleliu. Um, you didn't see Kurabayashi when Suribachi fell, ordering an all-out counterattack to try to reclaim that ground because he knew it wasn't going to work and it would be wasteful of his men. And what you start to see in the battles for these outposts, and I this isn't validated in the source material, but I would bet money that this is motivated by General Cho,
Oh, yeah.
that you've got all of these aggressive counterattacks going in to try to reclaim this ground. The result is a hell of a lot of frustration on the part of the Americans because they do get kicked off the top of these ridges over and over and over again. But in terms of the gradient of casualties, we've got the positive gradient because we're actually inflicting more on the Japanese than they're inflicting on us, heavy as ours are. And given the fact that 32nd Army is badly outnumbered by 10th, that's not a position that is long-term viable for 32nd Army. The major point I'm trying to make here is Ushijima could have drawn this battle out even longer had he been willing to really just play passive defense on the whole thing. And when a place like Kakazu is captured, that's fine. On to the next line, because I'm arrayed in depth, all the way past Shuri Castle. Anyway, but
Well, no, that's a perfect example because it's estimated that the vast majority of the Japanese casualties that were inflicted when they made their daylight, mind you,
ding, 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 ding.
counterattacks because they're
Yep.
running back up or alongside or whatever the case may be, whatever piece of terrain they're on,
Right,
directly into the teeth of
right.
American automatic weapons. And by this time in 1945, most infantry squads are arrayed pretty much the same. Most guys have M1 Garands. There's a few guys that have M1 carbines, but there's a lot of automatic weapons in these units too. Yes, there was one BAR guy, but I'm here to tell you, if you had the opportunity to carry a BAR as opposed to an M1. More often than not, you're going to take an M1, I mean, a BAR or a Thompson. Just look at the photographs. It's there. I
Right.
knew but privates that were carrying Thompson submachine guns. So we have a lot of automatic weapons. And as we know, as we've seen throughout this war, when the Japanese run at American positions and they run right at them, they seemingly just always run into a hail of lead. And that's exactly what's happening here. And to your point, John, every time they're running through these attacks and we're killing these people in the daylight, yeah, they can reinforce some of these positions, but there's a limited amount of people that they can bring here.
Exactly.
And there's
Yeah.
more people that we're just feeding into the line. So it's eventually going to bend. It's going to bend, and eventually it's going to break.
It's going to break.
So, Bill,
None of which is evident to the guys who are having to go up and down this
no,
goddamn hill. I mean,
hell no,
right.
absolutely not.
To
No,
them, it's just, a Sisyphean, um, ordeal where they're going up and they're getting kicked off and going back down. And to all outward appearances, we're not making any progress at all.
and truth be told, we're really, in terms of ground gained, we're really
Right.
not.
We're not.
But it's the effect of the
It's
piling up of the casualties is what's
exactly
going to wind up getting
the
us.
coin of the realm in this battle for the Japanese is emplaced defenders, you know,
Mm,
dudes under cover.
mm,
And if I start subtracting big chunks of those from 62nd Division, which is the heart of Shuri Castle's defenses, that unit, which is the highest quality unit on this island, as far as I can tell, when that unit finally folds up, that's when Shuri's going to fold up.
like a lawn chair.
Yep.
So, Bill, disregarding the casualties already sustained
Mhm.
by the 96th, Brigadier General Easley, he decides he's going to launch another full out frontal assault on these positions, isn't he?
Yeah, so we're not above doing silly things either, right? The defense in depth strategy John's describing was exactly the right strategy for the Japanese if only they had executed it. A trit, fall back, a trit, fall back. That's what defense in depth is all about. It makes the other guy bleed more than you're bleeding. But the frontal assaults just kind of accelerate your bleeding without necessarily, it violates the whole defense and depth strategy. But here we have a case where an attack would see the usage of the division's 105 and 155 millimeter artillery when our assistant division commander, General Easley, orders another frontal assault. Airstrikes were used, naval gunfire supplied by the battleship New York, BB 34. The gorge at the base of the ridge did not allow for the usage of armor, as you said, Seth, so the infantry would have to go at it alone. This bunker, I mean, John, I think you said that you've seen evidence of this heavy fire,
Yeah.
or maybe probably naval gunfire, right?
Yeah, there is actually still a bunker up on top of Kakazu today that you can kind of climb into and climb out the hole that was made in the front of it by something. And it
Mm,
might well have been this particular bombardment. I'm not an expert on what size ordnance put a hole in a bunker like that, but it had to be something pretty big. It was probably 6 inch or larger. So yeah, I mean, the net result again is that we are slowly attriting the defenses here, but for the expenditure of all the thousands of shells that we shot at the ridge in the course of this attack, we're not exactly killing a lot of dudes.
No, we're not. And I wanted to make mention about the USS New York for multiple reasons, not the least of which is we've never talked about this thing before.
Right? It's
And
all been
mm,
She's always been out in the Atlantic the whole war.
right, right. And then she was used as a
Mhm.
training vessel
Yeah,
uh, during the war and was pulled into the Pacific after the fact that her crew morale was like, this is not why we joined the Navy,
right.
is to
Let's
sail
go
around
shoot at
training
something.
guys. Yeah, let's go kill something.
Yeah.
So this becomes another one of those floating gun platforms, much like, USS Tennessee and, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So yeah, New York, USS New York, old battle wagon,
Old.
but she still can go kaboom when she
Yeah.
has to. So,
She and Texas were the two oldest battle wagons in the fleet. And at the beginning of the war, they actually had been doing a lot of convoy escort work.
mhm.
They were escorting a lot of those troop convoys that were going over to the UK. New York is involved in D-Day as well in Europe. But yeah, after that, there's nothing for her to do. But they finally do bring her out here, and there's things to shoot at here.
Indeed,
yep.
plenty of them. So when the assault that Bill was talking about kicks off at 07 on April 10th, Colonel Hira's defenders, after suffering, air quotes, in through the artillery barrage, sat completely untouched in their defensive positions despite the hours-long barrage unleashed by us. Second and third battalions of the 383rd led the attack this time. The results of this headlong attack ran into enemy machine gun fire and rifle fire, just like the previous attacks. American bodies quite literally littered the field. More attacks against Kakazu resulted in even more American casualties. Americans held the bottom of the ridge, and in some places they had made progress up portions of the ridge. But by April the 12th, they were still where they, for the most part, had started days before. And now the Japanese began throwing even more heavy artillery into the gorge and the saddle beneath the ridge line. The massive, we've talked about these on EWO,
Yeah.
but
Spigot
they're here
mortars.
to, yeah, these things are freaking huge. It
They're
looked,
big.
there were guys that said that the shells, you could see them going through the air and they looked like trash cans.
That's exactly what they say. Yeah, these big wobbling trash cans coming down.
Mhm.
Of course, the trash can is full of TNT. That's the
Yeah,
last thing you
Yeah.
want. Oh
These are
God.
like those big
It's
Civil
just,
War mortars, right?
yeah.
exactly.
And they
Exactly.
Yeah.
wobble yeah, not a good feeling, not a happy thing to be underneath. So,
They were woefully inaccurate, but they weren't really there to provide accuracy. They were there to provide a kaboom,
kaboom.
and that they do indeed. However, on one night on April the 12th, one round actually got lucky and exploded above a cave on Kakazu. That cave was occupied by GIs and was being used as essentially a field hospital. The damn thing exploded, and the explosive charge was so big that it actually collapsed the entrance of the cave, trapping the Americans inside the cave. It killed 13 of the GIs outright before they were eventually dug out. That we did get these guys out of here, but
Yeah,
that's how big this damn thing is. It literally just went
yeah,
and collapsed
it's a
the entrance
kaboom.
to the cave.
Yeah,
Huge, huge. By the morning of the 13th, General Easley of the 96 had concluded that he needed help. And yeah, I think you do, my friend. The
memo.
seventh, yeah, big time. The seventh ID was inserted into the line, and together, both of these units did start to make some small bits of progress. With the addition of the seventh, the two units were able to gain 1,000 yards and capture Hill 178, which had been used as a Japanese artillery observation post.
Yeah, it's further off to the southeast. That's right.
Go
That's
ahead,
two
Bill.
divisions, Seth. We got Marines up north that are having very little resistance. We call them down, right?
No, just wait. And we're gonna talk about that in a minute. I have my own theories, but we'll get to
Mhm.
that. But
All
by the
right.
way, to answer your question, what are the Marines doing right now? Not a whole hell of a lot. You know,
There
the
is
sixth
some
is up there
action.
fighting,
Yeah,
but yeah,
they're up there fighting on the Motobu
right.
Peninsula and clearing that out. But yeah, First Mardiv is not doing
They're
a
not
lot
doing
right.
anything. No,
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah.
doing anything. I remember my good friend Sterling Mace, who was in K-35. He said they had more barbecues on Okinawa than they did anywhere else.
Wow.
And yeah, of course, he's referring to these days. He's not referring to anything after May 1st,
Yeah.
but he's referring to these days. He said literally, we had more barbecues on Okinawa than any other time in my time in the
Right.
Marine Corps. So by the end of the 3-day assault on Kakazu, the 96th ID and 7th ID casualties stood at 2,880, with
It's absurd.
700 of those men listed killed in action. I'm going to say that again. After a 3-day assault on these impenetrable, for the best part, ridge lines, the two American divisions suffered 2,880 casualties, of which 700 were killed in action.
Yeah.
That is
That's brutal.
So,
Peleliu-esque, Iwo Jima-esque
yeah.
numbers, Bill.
Yeah.
I think that's, doesn't that equal the entire Tarawa campaign ratio? Um,
Yeah.
it's got to be
Yeah,
getting
pretty close.
close.
It's
Yeah.
close.
Let's do some
Yeah.
real-time history. You keep talking and I'll
I'll do
Go
that.
for
Okay.
it.
So the futility of these attacks left the 96th commanding general, Major General Jim Bradley, at the end of his rope. Alarmed at the declining strength of his division, he had no choice but to leave them online. The fight for Kakazu would keep eating up men in piles. And the point I make about Tarawa is everybody thinks about Tarawa as this terrible battle, and it was.
Yeah,
But I think we're almost at the same levels of casualties
we are
after
actually.
only three
Yeah.
days in Okinawa. And we got a month and a half to go, as John has already said.
What were
Is
the
that right?
casualties offhand for
A
Tarawa?
thousand, 1,009 KIA and 2,101 wounded. So just over 3K. And yeah, we've piled that up in our two divisions in 3 days here. So
Yep.
yeah, in terms of
So,
casualties per day, you're roughly in the running. And yeah, we're just kicking this thing off now.
Yep.
yeah. So the point I'm making here is we think of Tarawa as this horrible, horrible battle way the heck up here near Peleliu and things like that. 3 days, we're already there on Okinawa. This is much worse, folks.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it doesn't get any better
Japanese,
either, by the way.
no, and it doesn't. Japanese General Ushijima's defensive plan was working. Is pretty obvious, right?
Yep.
Working perfectly. In fact, he was under no false illusions that his men would survive or win. But they were doing exactly what he wanted and needed them to do, which is to say, bleeding the Americans white, making them pay for every yard of gain. His policy of forcing the Americans to come to him was paying huge dividends. However, his XO, the aforementioned General Cho, was embarrassed and humiliated by the defensive stature of the forces on Okinawa. It's beneath the stature and legacy of the Imperial Japanese Army. We just attack, attack, attack. We don't defend. Cho sought to change that defensive posture in what would be the last major offensive by the Japanese against American forces. Let me say
Two,
that
actually.
again.
Yeah, two.
There's two.
Yeah,
Yeah.
two.
We're coming up to number one. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Cho would ultimately speed up the pace of his men and his men's own destruction. Yeah, as you were going to say, John, there are two, right?
Well, and here's another example of the difference in leadership between Ushijima and our gentleman on Iwo Jima.
Kurabayashi.
Ikurabayashi. I know I'm having a
Yeah.
senior moment all of a sudden. Kurabayashi had a guy like this in his batting order. When he first took over that island, he had regimental commanders like, no, we have to fight them on the waterline, yada, yada, yada. Kurabayashi fired him, got him off the
Mhm.
island, and sent him home because he was not comporting to Kurabayashi's vision for this battle. Ushijima, arguably, he and Cho have had months together, right? And he knows who this cat is. There were plenty of opportunities to relieve Cho of command and let Yahara, who's clearly the brighter guy, run the defense here. But he doesn't do that. And again, yes, it's an effective defense. It absolutely is bleeding the Americans white, but it could have been a hell of a lot worse if Ushijima was willing to just play the long drag out game down to perfection in the ways that guys like Nakagawa had and Kurabayashi.
Mhm.
And to be clear, that was my mistake in the notes. I said the last. It was actually, to your point, Johnny, is
There's two.
100% right. There's two. There's this
Yeah.
counterattack, counteroffensive, and then there's actually a
Big
larger
one.
one on
Yeah.
May 2nd, I think it
Fourth
is
and
when it
fifth.
kicks off. Fourth and fifth. Okay, there we
Fourth
go.
and fifth. Yep.
And it's that one that really does some
That one.
significant damage to the Japanese defensive capabilities because of the casualties they sustained, but we'll
Yep.
get to that next week. That being said, Japanese Lieutenant General Cho Isamu, which is the gentleman that we were talking about just a second ago. This is General Ushijima's XO. He was loath to defend anything at all because, as Bill said, he felt that was beneath the Japanese army, that they should attack at all times, no matter what. Before the invasion, go ahead.
He's an idiot.
Yeah,
He's an
he is.
idiot.
Yeah.
He does not understand what he is up against. And to an extent, you can understand this because in order to understand your enemy, you have to have survivors who have fought that enemy and actually
Correct.
can, bring data home to the home team and say, this is how these guys fight. Well, there's damn few people actually coming off any of these islands. So the amount of, from the Japanese side, I mean, which means that the amount of corporate knowledge within the Imperial Army, understand that the Imperial Army as an institution did not start even teaching staff level courses on how to fight the Americans until 1944. So cats like Cho, who have been cooling their jets in places like China for the whole freaking war, he has absolutely no idea what he is up against. He does not understand what he is trying to fight. He's an idiot. And,
Yeah, we said
that's just the bottom
This,
line,
no, well, no, you're 100% right. But
right.
this is the type of personality that is
Right.
going to uh, let the war drag out as long as it does.
Yeah.
This is the type of clown,
Yeah.
which is what he is, that says we can win with our spirit. No,
Right.
dude, you can't.
You can't. And
You
yeah, it goes
can't.
back all the way to, Colonel Ichiki slash
Yep.
Iki on Guadalcanal. He's the same breed of cat. The problem is that at the very top of the army, you've got General Anami, who is, the army minister, and he's the same breed of cat too. And so, yeah,
Yep.
let's just say that there are systemic issues within the Japanese army that make it extremely difficult for them to do the right thing in terms of how they should be organizing their defenses. And it takes a leader with an absolute iron will, Kobayashi again, to just say, no, we're doing it my way. You can go kill yourself over in a cave if you don't like it, but we're doing it my way. And
Mhm.
Ushijima can't, he's too nice a guy. And all the accounts
Mhm.
that we have of him say that he really is a pretty quality dude. He's too nice, and he will not get this guy Cho to shut up or cap
Yeah.
himself and take himself off the stage. But anyway, sorry, I'm
He,
rant
Okay.
mode off.
No, it's okay. Yeah, so guys, we said, months ago in a different context, the IGA was kind of strategically focused on China and the IGA on the
The
United States.
Russians,
mhm.
Yeah, and the Russians, right? Yeah. And this is one of those perfect example of if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
bingo.
And so
Yeah.
they're using this hammer. It's pretty effective on the Chinese, and they can't think that they need to modify their tactics against the
Oops.
Americans with completely different capability.
Yeah, we're
And
a
that's what you
different
see with
animal,
Cho.
completely different
Yeah.
animal.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Ever since the American landings, Cho had been, and I put this in the notes, agitating, which is how I can literally see him going, but Daddy, I went to McDonald's. But Daddy, I went to McDonald's. No, we're
right.
going to eat the salad tonight, son. I went to McDonald's over and over until he's finally like,
Shut
damn
up.
it, do what you
Yeah,
got to do.
right.
And
Mm.
I kind of can envision that happening to an extent. He had been agitating Ushijima to launch a counteroffensive against the Americans to kick them back into the sea and all this other baloney.
Oh,
And yeah, exactly. And annihilate what stayed. Cho seemingly could not wrap his brain around the fact that by the end of L Day, the Americans had
60.
60,000 dudes ashore. And there's more
that's a
coming,
lot.
by the way.
Yeah.
Mm.
Now, by the second week of April, the Japanese had clearly halted the American advance and had their enemy in a holding pattern. So, in other words, we're sitting there at Kakazu Ridge going, we can't really
Mm-hmm.
move. And when we do, we have to come back. And it's literally it's just like this seesaw thing going back and
Yep.
forth and back and forth and back and forth. He had us stopped cold. Like we were stopped cold. At this point, Cho insists that it's time to strike. Ushijima, as I put in the notes, either tired of hearing Cho complain or bending to the pressure to attack. Because it wasn't just Cho. Cho had people on in his team
Yep.
too that
Yeah,
were
no,
also
that's
saying,
true.
"Oh, hey, we need to do
Yeah.
this. We need to do." But he was the ringleader. Let's be
Yeah,
real.
he's the ringleader. But no, you're right. There
Hmm.
are divisional commanders within the Japanese order of battle that are agitating for this because it's galling to them too to have to sit on the defensive and just get chewed up. I
Yep.
get it.
Yep.
But yeah.
He draws up a plan which stated that three Japanese battalions would strike the U.S. 7th Infantry Division on the eastern side of Okinawa, while an additional three would strike the 96th on the western side near Kakazu. Bill,
Yep.
you have the map.
There's map
Yeah, here it
12.
is.
Yep.
Yeah, so you want to talk us through this, John?
Yeah, well, it's just basically as Seth said, we're gonna have three battalions, three. Let's just think about that. Three battalions try to take on an American infantry division in the
Mhm.
seventh over on
With artillery support.
yeah, on the eastern side of the island, and then basically mirror image that up, going up coast Highway 1 here into the teeth of the 96th. This is madness. This is never going to work. I
Mhm.
don't care how much artillery you've got. You are not going to attack an American infantry division at a strength of 1 to 3 and kick us off of a piece of turf. This is just it's asinine. It's
It's
a
ludicrous.
six a 6-year old could figure out the math here, but
Mhm.
Cho
Yeah,
can't. Anyway,
Sun Tzu said 5-1 odds will guarantee success when you're on the offensive, and here he's 1-3 odds.
Yeah,
Not quite
Yeah.
the same.
not quite the same.
Not
Anyway,
at
And
all.
we've been talking about Shuri. That's down here. The castle
yes.
still exists today. It's a nice place to visit. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So the main obstacle, according to Cho, would be to a successful attack, would be the American field artillery, duh, and naval gunfire. In previous campaigns, Japanese offensives had failed largely because the area over which the troops advanced was smothered with gunfire within a few moments of the opening of the attack. Well, yeah, that's
That's
what you do.
that's how we roll.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what you do, man. So after a bombardment by Japanese artillery, three battalions of the 62nd Division on the west and three from the 22nd Regiment of the 24th Division on the east were to penetrate the American lines during the night of 12-13 April. Then the troops were to scatter through the American-held area as far north as Kishaba, 1.5 miles northeast of Futima, each battalion taking an assigned area. The Japanese were to this really, the more you read about, the more when you say it out loud, you realize how stupid this is. The Japanese were to hide in caves and tombs, awaiting an opportunity to fall upon 10th Army rear elements on April 13th.
It's a good
If
one.
you are to penetrate these lines, which, as we know, dribs and drabs spots they're going to get through, do you not think that the alarm is going to go off back at HQ and saying, "Hey guys,
Yeah.
by the way, there's Japanese, there's a rat in a wood pile. We need to go and get these guys." They're just going to sit there and hold up until we decide to wake up. Come
Yeah.
on, it's foolishness.
Yeah.
At that point, the Japanese theoretically would be able to engage the Americans in hand-to-hand combat with cold steel, at which they considered themselves superior. American guns would be silent since their fire would endanger friendly troops as much as the Japanese.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
you know, and to their credit, yes, we are very chary about wanting to bring down fire on our own
sure.
troops. And this is a tactic the Japanese did use very successfully in the early part of the war at battles like Jitra in Malaya, where they closed to smash mouth distance with the British Indian defenders in the 11th Indian Division, precisely so that the British would hesitate to bring down artillery fire on their own troops. And so they just had to battle it out mano a mano, infantry versus infantry. This is never going to work against the Americans in 1945.
Mhm.
Um, Even our rear area troops, in many cases, are very heavily armed at this point. Every truck driver, I mean, my God, we're putting 50 calibers on our trucks for crying out loud, and
Yep.
all those truck drivers have got M1 carbines. So, even if you do manage to penetrate some elements into our ostensible rear area, we have plenty of reserve troops that can come in and mop you up. And you're not going to find our field hospitals and our motor pools are going to be all that easy to tangle with either, let alone our field artillery battalions.
No,
Good night. Anyway,
absolutely
sorry,
not.
I'm in rant mode today. This because it's just such a stupid plan.
It
And
is
It
stupid.
is.
It's a
Yep.
waste of life. Bill, tell us about the 62nd Division.
Yeah, so these guys were already in line. They pulled some of their units to the west to enable the 22nd Regiment to move into position. Now, the 22nd was located on Oroku Peninsula, south of Naha. I think, hang on a second. We're talking
yep,
about down here. Okay?
yep, got
So
to
that's the
bring those
22nd.
guys up.
Yeah. So moving in a line was itself a major effort since the entire route was exposed to bombardment. Lieutenant Colonel Masaru Yoshida, commander of the 22nd, on 10 April instructed his troops on the importance of secrecy. Shh. Although you will be traveling in darkness over bad roads and under severe shelling, the secrecy of our plans must be maintained to the last. March in sinuous eel line. Although you're going to an unfamiliar place, do not make any noise when you arrive, but dig foxholes quietly
In
in
hard
hard
ground.
ground
Yeah, which is not, it's impossible,
and
by the way.
camouflage them skillfully by dawn tomorrow. In submarines, we sometimes have to be very, very quiet, guys. And sometimes you're telling that trash compactor as you're trying to compact the crash, shh. It doesn't work very well.
Doesn't
And
work.
neither does digging foxholes quietly in hard ground either.
I will say that the Japanese are very good at night infiltration. It is
Sure,
something that their army does
absolutely.
extremely well, but it's one thing to do this at a tactical level when you're talking about, okay, I'm going to move, 50 to 100 yards in that direction, try to infiltrate American lines and raise some hell and knife a guy in his foxhole. It's quite another thing to try to move a regiment overland multiple miles in darkness and then have them take up attack positions in order to surprise the Americans and be hidden, in order to do that. This is just, it's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Edson's
Or
Ridge, maybe?
overly optimistic, whatever the chronic
Ed
over optimism of this particular army.
Kawaguchi's attack on Guadalcanal, anybody? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
Never think of
perfect.
that. So,
Abe?
what's that? What's that, Bill?
No, the Alligator Creek. Just
Oh,
going back
Yeah,
oh,
to
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
same thing.
So, brilliant enemy flares exploded over the battle line shortly after dusk on 12 April. Two of them were red parachute flares. Another seemed to be a dragon flare. American intelligence officers consulted a Japanese signal code captured only days before. The red burst meant we are attacking with full strength tonight. The other flare stood for make all out attack. We know you're coming now, Jackson. Shortly after the first flare, Japanese artillery opened up, which, as we've said, they had in spades, an intense bombardment. Hundreds of enemy 105 and 150 millimeter shells burst throughout the areas just behind the American lines, most of them around command posts, observation posts, and artillery positions. Regiments reported receiving the heaviest barrages of their entire war experience. In the 96th Division area, more than 1,000 rounds fell on the 381st Infantry, approximately 1,200 on the 383rd. This is not a small barrage by
No,
any stretch of
that's
the mind.
that's significant. Yeah, for sure.
That's a lot of firepower.
Yep.
However, the troops were well dug in, and losses for American losses were light. We've already seen this. It's the exact opposite. What's happened to the Japanese now, it's happening to us. The
Yep.
3rd Battalion of the 184th 7th ID estimated that 200 rounds of 105 millimeter fire landed in front of them within the space of 5 minutes. Um, Japanese in groups ranging from platoon to company size, with radio communications to their own command posts, began to infiltrate in strength into the American lines in the general area between Kakazu and Tombstone Ridge. The 96th ID front in the area under attack was thinly held because these guys had been whittled away to virtually nothing. There was a large bulge in the lines where the 382nd had been held up by strong enemy positions in the Nishibaru, Kaniku, Tombstone Ridge area.
Just farther down to the southeast.
Mm.
Nishibaru is the ridge that parallels Kakazu, but is just a little bit down to the southeast from it.
So by far, the heaviest blow was delivered by the 272nd Independent Infantry Battalion. This is Japanese now, obviously commanded by Captain Shimada and operating under control of the 62nd Division. The 272 had the mission of attacking Kakazu and breaking through at that point. And
Yep.
I put in the notes, this is not a banzai charge. They're not just running pell-mell, through the night screaming and yelling like a bunch of fools. These guys had precise knowledge of American positions. Why? Because A, they were captured Japanese positions, and B, the Japanese could see everything we were doing.
Everything.
If a guy picked his nose, they knew about it.
Yep.
Composed of 3 rifle companies and a machine gun unit, the 272 was smaller than the other independent infantry battalions, but they were well equipped. So this is a fight that when the Japanese do reach American lines, it's stout. I mean,
Yeah.
we were making light of it because the plan is stupid. But as has always been seen and will be proven until the end of the friggin' war, when the Japanese infantry gets man to man,
Yeah.
they're tough human beings.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
Bill, tell us about
I
from
brought,
dusk on. Oh, go ahead.
no, what I was going to say is I brought the map up. And by the way,
Hmm.
before somebody credits me with these maps, these are John's maps. I'm just projecting.
They're the Army's
Yeah,
maps.
the
I
Army
just
map.
I
Yeah,
just did
the
the
armies.
screen cap work yesterday to make them happen. So
Yeah, very nice, very nice. So from dusk of 12 April until past midnight, a terrific artillery and mortar barrage blanketed the 1st Battalion, 381st Infantry, on the north slopes of Kakazu Ridge, and the 2nd Battalion, 381st, on Kakazu West. At 0300, the Enemy fire intensified on the north slopes of Kakazu West and Kakazu Ridge. This was the signal for the 272nd, aforementioned here, it's pushing up this way, okay, to move out of the Kakazu town up into the draw, separating the Kakazu Ridge from Kakazu West. In an effort to break through the American lines while smaller groups tried to flank Kakazu West on the west, as the enemy carrying knee mortars and machine guns advanced down the draw into the American lines on the northwest slopes of Kakazu Ridge, a mortar squad of the 1st Battalion of the 381st, led by Staff Sergeant Beaufort T. Anderson, he must be from Massachusetts, holed up in a tomb where it commanded the draw. Ordering his men to stay under cover, Anderson went out into the dark to face the enemy alone. He grenaded the enemy column until his supply of grenades was exhausted, but the Japanese kept advancing. In desperation, Anderson turned to his squad's mortar ammunition. He tore a mortar shell from its casing, pulled a safety pin, banged the projectile. You've seen this in movies, right, folks? Mm-hmm. And then tossed it towards the enemy, threw it football fashion into the midst of the bad guys. Its explosion was followed by screams. Anderson threw 14 more shells, and the enemy advance in this area came to a halt. In the morning, 25 Japanese dead were found here, weighted down with ammunition and explosives. For this feat, Anderson was later awarded, quite righteously, the Medal of Honor.
Mm-hmm. That when I was reading that, and it's like I got to put this in here because it brought to mind, and I'm not trying to digress and get off topic, but I know I can already see people going, I know where I've seen this before. Saving Private Ryan. There's a scene at the end of the movie when the Germans are coming through the little fake little town, and they're taking the mortar shells and they're heaving them like in their 60s. They're heaving them over their, overhand like you would, a football for all intents and purposes, and they're going kaboom, and people are going, oh, that's Hollywood. Not so much.
Yeah.
Not so much.
Mm-hmm.
So by morning on April 14th, the Japanese counteroffensive, such as it was, had been essentially killed off. It had been snuffed out. Normally, in a situation such as this, after a Japanese counteroffensive, the Americans would have immediately taken advantage of their enemies' fruitless efforts and attacked themselves. That's what happens generally. But the 383rd specifically were so beat up and spent they could not launch an effective attack. And we already mentioned the casualties, and obviously we're sustaining casualties in this assault as well. So despite the absolute beating that had been inflicted on the Japanese, we could not take advantage of it. That's how bad off our guys are at this stage, at this early stage of the battle around Kakazu, is that we've already pounded these guys in this counteroffensive, and we can't take advantage of it at all. That's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 62nd Division on the Japanese side, of course, has now just essentially expended a third of their frontline strength in the course of this counterattack. They threw a regiment in, and they only have 3. So, this is not good for their long-term prospects either. But, yeah, you already sort of have the image of these two kind of punch-drunk boxers, already going at it. And this is the outer outpost line for Shuri Castle. Yes. We're nowhere near Shuri yet.
Mm-hmm. No, the real, this is back Kakazu and Cactus, and we're going to talk about Hacksaw in a few minutes. This is all bad, but the really bad stuff is already, is coming up further here as we move further south.
Yep.
So despite the stalemate along the lines, which is exactly what it was. And that is precisely what it was. We were not gaining any ground. We were just kind of sitting there holding tight. General Simon Bolivar Buckner, the 10th Army, was satisfied with the state of the campaign thus far. In the north, and this is true, obviously, 6th Marine Division was in almost total control of the Motobu Peninsula. The 77th Infantry Division, which we talked very briefly last week, they were just about done with taking Iishima, that was off the coast. And to Buckner, at this stage, everything is going well. he figured that after the 77th, and this is obviously what happens, that after the 77th is done on Yishima, he's going to move them over to Okinawa as a reserve.
Yep.
Replacements were pushed directly to the front line with the 96th, not, to the 96th and the 7th Infantry Division. And by April 18th, a new assault is ready to go, flush with massive amounts of artillery shells. Now, I, do we want to digress into the state of Buckner's control of the situation? I mean, he has complete control. I don't want to make it sound like he doesn't, but his assessment of the situation as it stands, I think, is a little bit out of touch. And we said last week that he's a guy that likes to get up to the front lines.
Yeah.
And
And you
and
don't
if
see a lot
what's
of
going on
evidence of
here?
that. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
At this stage of the campaign, I feel like he's got his eye on too many different balls at this point. Yeah, he's got to fight in the south, he's got to fight in the north, he's got to fight offshore at Ieshima. And yeah, I don't think he is accurately understanding the scale of the opposition that is to his south, which is going to turn out to be
Mm.
the real bear in the bear trap. So
You would think, if nothing else, the casualty rate would have made him raise an eyebrow and go, damn,
you're right.
really? How many and how
Yeah,
long? But it
yeah,
apparently made no mark on him whatsoever at
yeah,
all. Now, 96th IDCO is making a mark on him because he's
yeah,
he's
for sure.
literally watching his division be chewed to pieces.
Yeah.
But Buckner is,
Do any of you know, because I don't, how Spruance is managing this battle? I mean, because he's in overall command, right? And to what
That's
degree he's
that's a
paying
great
attention?
yeah, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, obviously, at this same point in time, as we're going to talk about, Spruance has got his hands full with his fleet just getting
Hmm.
chewed up by the
Yeah,
kamikaze threat. I mean,
that's exactly
that's
what I was looking
another
for.
episode,
yeah, the
right? Yeah.
first of those big Kikasui attacks comes in very early in the campaign, and so
April 6th.
yeah,
Hmm.
that was gonna be my guess. Yeah, April 5th or 6th.
Yeah.
And
So
these are big attacks. I mean,
uh,
these are big attacks.
yes,
200
Yeah,
and
indeed.
300. Yeah.
loses the Indianapolis even before that, I think.
Good
But
point.
yeah. Hmm.
So, yeah, Spruance may not have his eye on the ball in terms of what's going on the ground. I mean, he's got plenty of things that he's got to deal with just
Hmm.
happening at sea at this point. So,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, and I agree with both of you 100%, is that Spruance, yes, Bill, obviously he's in overall command of this operation, but he's not a ground commander.
yeah,
And
It's true.
Buckner was put there for a reason. So he's the guy that's supposed to be running the show. And he is, to be 100% clear, Buckner is doing his job.
Hmm.
But Spruance is, I mean, I think in 3 days, he loses three flagships, Spruance does.
Yeah, I
He
think so.
loses the
He does.
Indy, and then he moves to, is it New Mexico, Battleship New Mexico,
New
or it might be
Mexico.
Battleship
Yeah.
Idaho. And then whammo, it gets hit. And then he
Hmm.
moves to another ship, and I cannot remember what it is off the top of my head. And blammo, it gets hit too. So he by kamikazes. So I mean, he's got his own
Yeah.
problems to deal
yeah.
with
I,
too.
I've always thought that that had to affect his situational awareness. He's
Sure.
busy running and shifting his flag, and his staff's got to move, and you get
Yeah.
set up, and where's the plot going to be, and this has substantial impact, more than just losing a cruiser to a kamikaze in Indianapolis. It has to go back, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on here.
Oh, and by the way, Yamato's going to come down, and there's going to be,
On the 7th.
technically a fleet action coming up here
Yeah.
in the
Right.
same time. So there are, he's juggling a lot of balls right now, and I think
Yeah.
rightfully so. He's paying attention to the fleet because, well, I
Yeah.
mean, that's his baby. That's what he's got to do. So
Yeah. From
he,
his perspective, it's like, I delivered you guys. You're ashore.
yeah,
You go do the things.
Do that
go,
army stuff.
yeah, go
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
that
The army
infantry
stuff.
stuff, man. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
So by 06 on April 19th, dig on this, 27 battalions of American artillery opened fire on Japanese positions on Kakazu and the Mura Escarpment. 27 battalions.
A lot of
You
boom
talked
boom.
about the Japanese having artillery? Brother, you ain't seen nothing
Nothing.
yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
For
For sure.
20 minutes, over 20 minutes, thousands of shells poured down on the Japanese in what would be at that time the largest American artillery barrage of the Pacific War. And that includes Manila, by the way. Over 19,000 rounds were fired to absolutely no effect whatsoever.
Well, yeah,
Well,
no out. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
we're not blowing things apart, but
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
I absolutely certain that the Japanese took some casualties and, it made
sure.
their lives unpleasant, but it was not a game changer like you hope it would be when you're using 27 battalions. And just to
That's
wax
mind-boggling.
poetic again on American artillery, at this point, um, cooperation between Marine and Army artillery is really, really good. And yes, there are no Marine troops on the line yet, but one of the things that Buckner had asked for was Marine artillery to come down from the north. And so the Marine artillery is actually in action at this point with the Americans, I believe. I'm pretty sure of that.
Some of it
And
anyway, yeah.
yeah,
First
and
division is,
so
or
and,
11th.
and at this point, there are no problems for the Army to say to a Marine artillery battalion, hey man, can you put some fire down on these grid coordinates? We do that all the time at this point. And the Army histories actually talk about just how good the cooperation was. And this really is sort of the pinnacle of American artillery fire in the Pacific at this point. We really understand what we're doing. But yeah, if your targets are all dug in 150 feet down or what have you,
Yeah.
uh,
I'm not going to do
yeah,
much.
you ain't going to do much.
Yeah, to your
Yeah.
point, yeah, you're going to kill some guys, and you might even collapse a cave or two.
Right.
You probably do.
Yeah.
But when you've got, 60 miles of interconnected tunnel struts, this bad boy, you ain't
Right.
going to kill them all, man. It's just
Yeah.
not going to
For
happen.
sure.
So American advances were indeed made, and ridge lines were indeed captured after this barrage of biblical proportions, but they were relinquished later to withering Japanese counter assaults. On April 19th, as it would turn out, that would be the deadliest day of the campaign for the 96th Infantry Division. Faced with the desperate need of fresh men, Buckner threw in the 27th Infantry Division into the fray on the same day. Their assault, like the 96th Bill, achieved absolutely nothing, didn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, John, I pulled up this map here.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to ask you to talk through this one. This is a pretty complicated map.
Yeah. And so that little blue arrow that you see there is actually what's going to end up being the American tank attack. That it's actually coming in. No, it's down to it's down to, yeah. Nope, nope, nope. Keep going back up to your right. Nope. That
Hmm.
right where, yeah, that arrow right there. Basically what ends up
Okay.
happening, there's a road that runs between Kakazu Ridge and Nishibaru Ridge. Yep, that's that road. And that's the only way we can get armor into this battle. And so what we end up doing is bringing in a battalion of American tanks that come right down that road and then are going to do a right hook and try to do right behind Kakazu Ridge and clean out the ridge and also the village that is behind that ridge. Unfortunately, as soon as those tanks start making their way down the road, the Japanese throw artillery fire down on them, which drives the infantry to ground. The tanks basically start operating solo then behind Kakazu Ridge to relatively good effect initially, but then the AT guns open up on them and start picking them off. And the end result is that by the end of that day, 22 of the 30 tanks that we send into this action are going to be knocked out. 22 tanks in a day, which is, yeah, that's the heaviest 1 day loss of armor in this entire campaign. To put that in perspective, usually at this point, our infantry divisions are each operating a battalion of Shermans, which is about 50 vehicles or so attached to each division. We've just burned half of a battalion worth of Shermans in an afternoon in the course of producing actually nothing in the way of results. It's pretty bad news. Yeah, so this lovely picture here is actually based on a captured Japanese document that shows the fire plan. There's that road in the middle coming down between Kakazu which is on the left-hand side, and Nishibaru Ridge, which is on the right. And as you can see, there's all these interlocking fields of fire there, and the Japanese have got that road just absolutely dialed in. And so, yeah, when they open up on that, it's very bad news.
Yeah, this is
22
really, really
tanks out
bad.
of 30. 22 out of
Yep.
30 in one day.
Hmm.
Goodness. Yeah,
That is
no good. No
no,
goose.
that is stout.
No
That,
big
that
goose.
is stout. Mm-mm,
Yeah,
Yeah,
mm-mm.
and it
so
is
what's
amazing when you're standing on the top of Kakazu and you're looking down into the village of Kakazu, you can see exactly where those tanks came around from the Americans' perspective from the left and tried to hook around there. But it's this valley, and the next ridge over is the Maeda Escarpment, and it's very high and had all sorts of guns in front of it. So yeah, it's very bad news.
Yeah, so what this means is the attacks in the area continued on April 21st, 22nd, and 23rd with painfully few results.
Yeah,
The few results that were realized were usually performed by small units, not those tanks, who managed to make their way to the tops of the ridges or hills and hold them. The frustrating thing, more than anything, to the GIs was the fact that they could not see what, if anything, they were doing to the Japanese. More often than not, anyone the GIs killed, they were pulled back into the caves.
Mhm.
Most Japanese bodies, with few exceptions, were unseen, so to the common doggy, it felt as if they were taking a one-sided pounding, but in reality, they were not, were they, Seth?
No, they weren't. And John, I don't know if you got a rough idea of the casualty estimates at this stage, but we are hacking away at these people. We are
yeah,
indeed killing people when we get into gunfights with them, even though you
for
don't see
sure,
them sprawled, and in some instances you do. You don't see them sprawled out on the ground. They actually are inflicting some significant casualties on the enemy.
for sure. 62nd Division, which again is the heart of this defensive sector. That is the division that the Shuri defenses sit on. Is I'm certain well down to less than half strength at this point
I would
because
imagine by now.
absolutely they've threw away a regiment in the course of that counterattack. They've lost hundreds of men in the course of defending first Cactus and then Kakazu with multiple tactical local counterattacks thrown in there. So yeah, 62nd is already very very beaten up at this point, and the Japanese are having to start bringing in independent battalions. We saw 327, as part of that. So yeah, things are not going well for the Japanese. That's for sure.
To that end, on April 23rd, men of the 32nd Infantry Regiment finally took and held key Hill 178. Once they had consolidated their positions, the GIs start exploring some of these caves to make sure that there's no bad guys in them. And in one cave alone, which clearly had been used for a field
Field
hospital
hospital.
or something along those lines,
Yep.
they found the bodies of over 400 dead Japanese, all of them victims of either artillery or gunshot wounds, not self-inflicted either.
Right.
And you can tell, believe me. The following day, April 24th, the gentleman that Bill talked about earlier, Lieutenant Hoss Mitchell's men and replacements that filled the ranks of the 96 captured and held the majority of Tanabaru and Nishibaru ridges, but at a high cost. In a 3.5 hour fight that it took to get these places, the 96 lost a further 118 men killed and a further 660 wounded. That that's I mean these
Oof.
guys are bleeding themselves to death. The 96, they are absolutely bleeding to death on these ridges up here. And just as we always say, spoiler alert, yes, they're going to be fed replacements straight up to the line, which that's a whole nother topic of conversation. The way the army just took guys off the boat and went, here, your infantry, go to the line. Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't end well for most of those guys, by the way. And they are a shell of their former selves, even by this stage of the battle. The Americans prepped for one last major assault on Kakazu, but the Japanese pulled a fast one. During the night, the Japanese, or what was left of them in the area, pulled out. The GIs could have cared less. I put in the notes.
Yeah.
All they knew was that the assault that was supposed to take place did not. On to the next one. So, with the planned assault that was to take place now postponed, for lack of a better term, the GIs along the line now surged ahead towards the next line of Japanese defenses. The 7th Infantry made fast progress on the eastern side of the island from Skyline Ridge and Hill 178 towards what would be called Conical Hill. We'll talk about that in a few minutes too. In the center of the line, the 96th moved towards the Urasoa Mura,
Urasoe,
thank you.
Urasoe Mura, or it also gets called the Maeda escarpment too. Yeah,
That's easier to say. We'll call it the Maeda escarpment.
Maeda is,
From,
yeah.
from 25 to 26 April, the advance, Bill, stopped yet again, didn't it?
It did, yes. So this escarpment was a 500-foot high plateau. We're going to hear a lot about plateaus coming up. And by itself, it was formidable, stretching some 4,200 yards from east to west, with the last 5 to 60 feet being a sheer cliff. The escarpment was a natural barrier. Throw machine guns and artillery in there, and you have a fortress. To the east, the escarpment was anchored by, as you said, Conical Hill, a ridge in the middle, and then another spire called Needle Rock on the other end. The GIs named it Hacksaw Ridge. So I'm pulling this up, and again, John, I'm going to ask you to talk us through it.
Yeah, so Hacksaw Ridge is actually up to your northwest there. You can see there's a move your mouse now down to your left and down.
Right
Keep
there.
going right chair. You can see, yeah, you can see that the topo lines there get extremely dense, which is because this is an extremely steep beast. And whereas Kakazu Ridge, you can walk from one end to the other end of that ridge in like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's really not that long a feature. The Maeda escarpment is, more like a mile and a half or so long. This is a pretty significant terrain feature. And yeah, the northern face of it is extremely steep. It is not all cliff. And for those of you who have seen the movie of the name, don't let Hollywood con you into exactly what this thing is. I mean, there's a scene in that movie where, the infantry are climbing up this cliff that looks like it's 300 feet high, and there's nothing like that. But it is definitely steep, and particularly towards its eastern end, as you say. Yeah, there is a legit cliff there that in some cases is 40, 50 feet high, and is really really steep. So not a friendly place. And as I say, it looks down on these ridges that we've just captured. It is higher than Kakazu. It is higher than Nishibaru. And so as we're crossing that valley to make our way up to the foot of this escarpment, we're under, Japanese guns and observation all the way there. It's a lovely piece of terrain.
We're gonna you said Japanese observation. Just
Yeah.
dig on this in a second. All right. So the area was manned by an estimated thousands of Japanese who occupied the subterranean, and I do mean that to the nth degree, fortress through a system of interconnecting caves, tunnels, and narrow passageways. To answer the question as to how to attack such a place, General Easley of the 96th had one answer, and he used this already, and he's going to use it again: artillery. Like
Artillery.
Yeah, because we got it, so you might as well use it, right? Because it's going to work eventually, but not so much here. Like at Kakazu, arty, naval gunfire, and airstrikes absolutely pounded the bejesus out of the area. Infantry took the heights and then were driven off. Rinse and repeat, as I put in the notes, because that's exactly what's going to happen. It's incredibly frustrating, incredibly frustrating. However, on the following day, April 27th, an exploratory mission led by a Captain Louis Reuter Jr. of the 381st Infantry Regiment found a way inside the Japanese positions in the area. What he found and later reported to his CO was absolutely astounding. Now, keep in mind, we don't know what the hell we're facing here. We have no clue. We know the Japanese are in here, but we don't know to what, layer or anything else. Venturing inside, talk about brass balls. This guy's got brass balls. Venturing inside a cave, Reuter and his men found that the cave was interconnected to dozens of others, some 3 stories down. And this is the really creepy part. The caves all peered directly into the American advantage point of attack. Entering one area, he found a set of artillery spotting binoculars positioned in a cutout section of rock. Peering through these binoculars, Reuter could see every road junction and rally point used by his 96th Infantry, and beyond all that, all the way to the freaking beachhead. The Americans were banging their heads against an absolutely impenetrable wall, and now, at least, the men in the 96th Command, I think that means, actually know it now at this point. And I say balls of steel. If that guy would have been caught in those tunnels,
Yeah, bad things happen, that's for
big
sure.
time, big time.
Yep.
But this is huge. It's a huge intelligence coup, such as it
Yep.
is, for these guys at this stage.
Yeah. If you'll allow me, I'd like to share my screen here and just show some of the pictures. I'm going to start back here. You can see those. This is the last time that I was actually on the top of Hacksaw Ridge. This was about a year and a half ago. And you can see it's just not a very big place. Again, if you
Mm-mm.
see the movie, it makes it look like the top of Hacksaw is this football field sized area, and it's nothing like that. Um, it is really, really small, honestly. And so here is a Google Earth view of the top of this ridge. If you look off to this is actually the direction that the Americans are coming in. They're coming in from the northeast here. This is the front of the ridge. This section right down here, this is actually a cemetery. And that's the reason that this ridge is still open today, is because it's a park and a cemetery. The cliff that we're talking about runs right along here. And Desmond Doss, who we're going to be talking about, goes up the cliff here. Needle Rock is this thing right down here in the lower corner here. Those pictures that I took were actually down in this open area. If you're standing along that fence, you're looking down on the tops of these trees. So it's a very steep drop off down to the town that's right below now. But the distance along this yellow line, which goes from the drop off on the north side, the drop off on the south side, is only about, as you can see down here, it's 160 feet, 170 feet. So again, this ridge line is pretty narrow up on the top, which means if you do make it to the top, the combat that you're going to encounter against the Japanese is extremely intimate in nature. They're right up next to you.
So to that end, when this labyrinth of information does reach American leadership, they were absolutely astonished at the
Gosh.
level. Yeah, I mean, it floored these guys. And we can get into this in a second because I have questions about this, but we can discuss.
Yeah,
At least now they had an idea of what I said they knew what they didn't know, but they had an idea of what they were up against. Buckner, who is now aware of the problem, did nothing, however, to change the tactics. He
right.
still believed that the campaign was moving at a good pace, yet those above him, namely Chester W. Nimitz, did not agree. Buckner was under pressure to get moving, but he still chose to steamroll his way forward,
Right.
with casualties skyrocketing, and because it really hadn't stopped. Many of his subordinates, which I'm talking about United States Army officers here, questioned Buckner why he didn't bring the United States Marines to the front, who, by the way, are done with their escapades up in the northern end of the island.
Yeah.
Sixth Marine Division is, well, for the most part, is done. First Marine Division, as we said, they're eating barbecue. They're
Yep.
not doing a damn bit of good, doing anybody any good at this stage.
Except their artillery, but yeah,
Right.
right.
The 11th Marines are up there, but the grunts are
Grunts.
in the rear with the gear at this point. So,
And Second Marine Division, which is a floating reserve, is sitting
yeah,
offshore doing nothing.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and Bill, we can talk about this. I want to get people. I want to get y'all's opinion on this because, and this is an absolute fact. Simon Bolivar Buckner was on what was called the Buckner Board after the Battle of Saipan after the whole Smith versus Smith thing. I mean, hence the
Yeah.
name Buckner Board. He was the head of said board to investigate, as you know, why Holland Smith relieved Ralph Smith, if it was justified, and all this other stuff. Do you guys think that there was any inter-service rivalry playing into this? I've read in several places that Buckner, some of his subordinates said it absolutely was. He wanted the Army to finish this push up the southern portion of the island. Or do you think he was just being pigheaded? Or both?
You
I
go
tend
first,
to think
John.
I tend to think both. Um, I but to me, the inter-service rivalry thing is less important than what I perceive as a lack of tactical imagination and operational imagination on Buckner's part. And although, okay, so some of the what if scenarios are, why don't you take Second Mardiv and land it on the southern tip of the island, use it to unhinge the Japanese defenses. They do have a division deployed down there, but it's a lesser quality division than 62nd Division. Couldn't you have done that to now make Ushijima have to face in two different directions? There's two prevailing or countervailing camps on that. The maneuver-based camp says, yeah, that's a good thing. You can potentially unhinge the Japanese. But I've talked to John McManus about this, and his opinion was that you potentially put a single division into what could be an Anzio-like position on that southern portion of the island, and you may not have the logistical wherewithal to continue supplying two different multi-division invasions over the beach. Remember, we don't have a harbor yet on this island. So can you keep Second Mardiv in supply if you land it down there? What if they end up getting hemmed in by all that artillery that's banging away at the northern end of the line, and you end up again with an Anzio situation? I don't know. I respect John a tremendous amount,
Sure.
but uh, any opportunity that you have in the Pacific to actually maneuver, I think it behooves you to maneuver. And I would I would say if I've got to place my bets on who has the better ability to improvise, um, if my risk is not maneuvering versus having to worry about logistics, I have tremendous confidence in our ability to be able to improvise our logistics. And I would
Agreed.
much rather err on the side of let's try to maneuver and, you know, and run this goddamn defensive struggle that we're in. Let's at least try. But Buckner doesn't do that. He doesn't want to do that.
Not
Where are
at all.
you at,
Bill,
Seth?
I
Bill?
was gonna
Um,
I was gonna say for two things. One, the Second Marine Division essentially does nothing through this entire campaign.
Yeah,
They do the feint at the beginning, which does actually do something, but they don't see any appreciable combat whatsoever. This is a veteran division. They are stocked to the gills with guys. They're ready to rock and roll, and they do nothing. I
yeah,
mean, and the casualties, as we know, are already ridiculously high, and they're
and
only going to get worse.
heading
And
north.
these guys are just sitting there and they're doing nothing. And it's not just the Marines that are saying, "Hey, let us land." It is General A.D. Bruce of the 77th Infantry Division, who
Is
I think
a
is one of the, he's awesome,
quality, yeah,
awesome. He
great
was
general.
yeah, he was Nimitz consistently said that he was the finest Army divisional commander in the Pacific Theater. Chester
Yeah,
Nimitz said that of Andrew Bruce. Bruce is sitting there saying, "Hey, dude, we've done this before at Leyte. We have done this very thing before at Ormoc. We have landed behind the Japanese lines and it worked. Yeah, it kind of sucked because we did also there have to ferry supplies and men through the beach and all that kind of stuff, just like you
yeah,
were talking about. But it worked, and
yeah,
it worked well, worked very well, quite to be quite honest. And you can land 77th and second, and almost at second ID, second Mardiv in the same or near the same spot, and you got two nasty, full-fledged American fighting divisions coming up your rear.
yeah,
Why do you not do this? And as we said last week, Okinawa is a big place, man.
yeah,
There's a lot of room to do that kind of thing. And I think the Japanese would have been in dire straits because
yeah,
you're talking about the prepared defensive positions. they're on the reverse slopes of these hills and ridges and things that we're, already banging our heads against just, over and over and over again. Well, if you come at them from behind, they're
Yeah,
not reverse slope uh,
anymore.
positions anymore, are
That's
they?
right.
And there's no way that the Japanese are going to be able to dig that deep into the belly of the beast
Well, I
in
mean,
that amount of time.
they did have defenses down in the southern part of the island,
Sure,
and we're going to run into
sure.
those in the tail end of the battle, but they are not as extensive.
Not like
And
this.
yeah, not like this. So, Bill, where do you
No.
come down?
Well, I got more thoughts on this than we have time for, but I'll say these. First of all, I'm not going to beat up on Buckner for reasons that will become clear in future episodes. Secondly, the whole point of landing on the southeastern beach is to engage in maneuver warfare. It's called turning movement, and what that
Mhm.
means is you get the enemy to turn towards the new engagement point, right? And so that's a great strategy, except for one thing. Once the Japanese are engaged here on Okinawa, there's no maneuver on their part. There's no maneuver. They're kind of hunkered down, and the occasional attacks and assaults. So the whole notion that they would shift their focus and attack to the east or something like that in response to a new landing, I think is just silly. And so that's the second point. Now, saying there is an opportunity to dilute forces by transferring troops to the new assault front, right? So if you dilute forces, then it has a similar effect, but not quite the same effect. The third point I'll make is this is not Leyte. These logistic ships are under significantly greater
True.
threat of
You're right.
kamikaze than they were down there. And you're trying to supply a whole bunch of people while they're trying to, like heck, not to get sunk. And it becomes a much more significant logistic problem. And the last thing I'll say is
I'm going to push
if
back on
in
2 and 3, but go. Keep going.
Okay, go. Yeah. Last thing I'll say, and then you could push back, is that if, in light of the Buckner board, Buckner engages in get even with the Marine Corps by wanting the Army to win this thing, that is even more egregious,
Mm.
perhaps potentially, than what Hull and Smith did at Saipan. That's all I have to say about that. Go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Point number 3 regarding the difficulty of supplying logistics over this beach and the threat of attack. Japanese kamikaze doctrine at this point is not targeting logistic ships. They are going
Mhm.
after warships.
Destroyers. Yeah.
Yeah, destroyers and carriers if they can get them. It's not until later on, really in the run up to what is the abortive evasion of Japan, that they shift their targeting doctrine to say go after the attack transport. So that's one thing. In terms of the turning attack, but what we're going to see later on in this campaign, fast forward, spoiler alert here, it's when the Japanese finally abandon the Shuri defenses and move the bulk of their survivors to the south of this island, along with the civilians. That's where the real killing starts, because that's where we catch them in the open, moving over ground to get to their new defensive line down in the south of this island. And I submit that if we land troops in the south part of this island and that brings the Japanese out into the open, just as they were forced to at Tinian, they thought we were going to land around Tinian town. Surprise, we came ashore in the two white beaches. Now you've got to make an overland movement in order to, try to repulse those landings. And we destroyed them. I think that
Mm.
the same thing potentially happens here at Okinawa. If you're short of manpower, now you got to bring some dudes down from the Shuri Castle defenses to try to contest those landing beaches. You're out in the open, we're going to absolutely wipe you off the map. So
Yep.
that's my pushback.
I
That's
think
good pushback.
I think you're right, and I think it was an unexplored opportunity because,
Yeah,
again, fixed positions are fixed positions. And to Bill's point, yeah, they can move to an extent, but they're not going to move everybody over
right.
there, and they're not even going to be able to move a large portion of it. To your point, John, because they're going to get obliterated. So I think that it was a missed opportunity. We don't like to
I
do
don't
what
disagree
ifs,
with that.
huh?
I'm just
What's
trying
that?
to play it out what was going on in their minds at the
Oh
time.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
In
No, no, I
retrospect,
agree. Yeah, I
100%.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we don't like to do a lot of what ifs because you go down
Mm.
the damn rabbit hole. But
This is
it's
one that
a
has stuck
yeah,
around for decades. I mean,
and
people are
it's
still
legitimate.
arguing. Yeah, it's a
It's
legitimate.
legitimate. Yeah. And
Yeah,
you're
I just
100% right. He did think that he being Buckner
Buckner.
wanted to avoid an Anzio like um episode. But again, it's completely different set of circumstances, man. You're fighting in Anzio, you're fighting some well equipped,
Yeah,
highly trained German units, which, oh, by the way, have massive amount of tank support.
yeah.
Different animal altogether than what's going on here. Different
Yeah.
animal altogether.
We will
So,
never know. We will
no, we
never
will
know.
not.
But yeah, the bottom line for me is I just don't see Buckner as being all that imaginative a general.
Clearly not. Clearly
Yeah.
not, because he does the same thing over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Bill, what happens on 26, 27 April?
Yeah, so here we got the 96th Infantry Division, dog faces, right? Attacked the areas near the escarpment and Needle Rock, the escarpment that we kind of generically referred to earlier. Making slight gains, the men suffered dearly. Company G in the 381st IR, when reaching the top, was riddled with machine gun fire, losing 18 men in a matter of minutes. Scurrying back down the way they came, the men rallied before being replaced by a Echo Company, in my parlance, making their way, it might be Easy Company, making
Easy.
their way up the slopes. E Company made gains before coming under heavy fire at the top of the ridge. One man, Private First Class William Reeder, decided to take actions in his own hands. So Reeder was from the small town of Dike, Texas. And in high school, he had starred as a pitcher before he joined the Class C East Texas League, a farm system of sorts for the majors. The 6'5" right-hander was a natural thrower, and his fixture in baseball looked bright from 1940 to 1942 when he pitched in the Texas League. However, like many men his age, he decided service to his country was more important. Guys in the major leagues joined up after the war began, right? Way higher, more capable, more highly paid baseball players than Reeder. So he joins the Army in 42, putting a hold in his baseball aspirations. On April 27, 1945, Bill Reeder decided to take his pitching arm and put it to use with grenades instead of baseballs. Now, guys, he's throwing these grenades, and there's some, I guess, skepticism as to how far one could really throw a grenade. I'm the physics guy in the group among the three of us, I think. But, John, I think you've done some real physics work as it pertains to how far he might have actually thrown these grenades.
So hold on. Let me be clear.
Okay.
Let me be abundantly clear here. I wrote these notes last week. I was ill. I don't know where the
No,
hell
no, no.
I came up
I
with the
wasn't gonna.
number that I
I
actually
wasn't gonna.
said.
No, no, no. I
No,
wasn't gonna throw
hey,
you
I'll
under the
take
bus,
ownership
Seth.
of it.
No, no,
No, I
no.
don't care. I'll take
I'm
ownership
not
of it.
throwing you under the bus, but I was really
I will.
impressed with John's
I
analysis
know
here.
John was,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I looked when he sent these notes, when John put his comments in it and sent them back to me last night. I looked at it and I went, "Holy crap! Yeah, that's
Oh,
not even physically possible for anybody alive to throw that
right.
far." I, honest to God, don't know where I pulled that number out of,
But
I
and
was
I'm
wondering
will
if
probably
we
it
all
was,
sitting
agree?
on that location.
and our listeners are
Well,
like, okay, what are they talking about here? And
Yeah.
bottom line is, Reeder's company comes under fire, and he's, in relatively desperate shape at this point, and starts getting out his crates of grenades and starts chucking these things a very long way, a notably
yes.
long way. Went through 4 boxes of grenades, throwing one after the other, and he's very, very accurate with these things too. In the process of this pitching performance, he knocks out 4 Japanese mortar positions and kills over a dozen charging Japanese, all with grenades. The
Hmm.
argument that then ensued was over just how far he was chucking these puppies.
Right.
And
Right.
Seth's initial estimates were, I thought, optimistic and
Way off.
way off. And I
Way
then
off.
then came in with uh, let's just say your average baseball weighs 5 ounces, a grenade weighs about 21, and there's no way that you're throwing an object that weighs 4 times as much, a greater distance than your typical pro baseball player will throw in a game. So
Mhm.
yeah, your
So
average human can throw a grenade typically between 60 and 80 feet. And this guy was probably doing appreciably better than that, but he weren't throwing no 300 feet.
So I did the math this morning. I pulled up the notes when
Did
I
you?
mean, I pulled up the map. I did. I pulled up the map when I got here and I found the rough estimates of the positions of where his company was.
Okay.
And one can look at the map and assume, and I know, yeah, I know you never assume because it makes an ass out of you and me, but hey, you do what you do. You're assuming where the Japanese were, and you can see where the Japanese positions roughly were, and it's about 100 to 120 feet, which is still a hell of a throw.
That's a
That
hell
is
of a
a
throw,
hell of a throw
World class.
to
but
do
I'll
it
buy that.
consistently to yeah 120 feet 130 or 100 to 120 feet, yeah, you can do that. You got a hell of an arm, and this dude did. He's a big old boy too, 6'5". That is not a small human being. I used to pitch, and I mean, I can tell you now that is a long ass throw to do consistently over time
And if
and to
if
do it
he is
accurately.
slightly uphill though, too, he also
He's throwing
benefits.
down.
He's throwing down, so he's
Correct.
getting some benefit from elevation as well. So yeah,
Correct.
I'll buy 120 feet. I was not buying 300.
Yeah, I don't know where the
Yeah.
hell I pulled that from,
It's all
honest to
good, man.
God.
You were
Yeah,
on, you
a lot of medication.
probably, yeah, I was going to say, probably had a couple bottles of Robitussin in you or something like that.
NyQuil.
NyQuil.
But
Yeah.
hey, we're not
Anyway,
perfect.
Well,
We're not perfect.
yep.
as it so
It,
happens, we're going to talk about Colonel Willie Mays. Oh, no, that's Colonel
that's
Edwin
later.
T. Mays.
Different
I
dude.
failed to mention though that Reeder did receive the Silver Star for his MVP performance at Needle Rock. So good on him.
He did. And by the way, for those who are interested, he actually did continue his baseball career.
Oh, really?
After he did.
Okay.
After World War II, he played a lot in the in the minors or farm systems. He did play in the majors for I don't know, like a year or two.
Hmm.
Played with St. Louis. So yeah, I mean he was a legitimate baseball major league and minor league ball player after the war too. So he
Good
did
on him.
ply his trade.
Yep.
Um, Meanwhile, while all this is going down, other American units are indeed making some gains. At Hills 150 and 152, men of Colonel Edwin May's 383rd Regiment, we've talked about them all episode, reached the tops of the hills only to discover that the area was, and I put in quotes, alive with Japanese beyond the high ground. Officers estimated that they could see upwards of 600 enemy troops in the open, which was highly unusual for the
Yeah.
Japanese on Okinawa. I have no idea why these guys were milling around in the middle of the
Yeah.
day.
That's weird. Fire for effect. I mean,
Big time. And that's exactly what they do. They
yeah.
open fire with machine guns, BARs, rifles, mortars. They call in arty, the whole 9 yards, and they just obliterate these people around there. Around Maeda Village is where this goes down. Um, the success of this attack against the Japanese absolutely disturbed Lieutenant General Ushijima, who, of course, is the commander of the 32nd Army. He ordered his 62nd, well, I keep saying that, division to immediately dispatch all reserves to the Maeda area, repulse the American advance, and prevent a repetition of the American success that had occurred that day. The 24th Division was to cooperate and provide additional troops if necessary. You put in the notes, and this is 100% clear that this is completely different than what Kurabayashi would have done or Nakagawa had done, or and I cannot remember the gentleman's name on Biak, but he's
Biak,
one of the
same breed of cat. Yeah, that dude is
yes,
the
yeah,
same. In fact,
can't think of his
Biak
name right now.
arguably is the first of
It's the
these.
first. Exactly.
Yeah, Kobayashi never would have ordered this. Um, uh, he would have been really mad that his troops were apparently out of
Sure.
position in the first place. What are those 600 dudes doing, standing out there in the open? Why aren't they actually manning the escarpment here? But I just cannot see Kurabayashi throwing good money after bad and trying to retake this across open ground. And that's exactly what the Japanese are going to try to do here. Again, you're trying to keep a positive casualty gradient operating in your favor. And every time you get out of your fortifications and counterattack across open ground, we are going to slaughter you. So you should not do that, even though it's galling to have lost positions on that escarpment like that. Um,
That's
yeah,
a waste of manpower.
it's a waste of
Waste of manpower. To that end, on April 29th, the Japanese struck back with counterattacks all along the 96th front line. Major George Buckland's 2nd Battalion 383 was hit by the Japanese using grenades and spears.
What are
One
you doing?
platoon.
Yeah.
What's that?
What are you doing?
Yeah, you're running at American infantry positions with spears.
Yep.
One platoon of 30 GIs had only 9 still on their feet when the fight was over. More than 250 Japanese are killed in this area alone. Once again, tanks and flamethrowers came forward as the attack is going on to repulse further attacks. Bill, what about Company L of 383?
Yeah, so these guys are attacking Hill 138, Seth. Fighting was furious and often hand to hand. The fighting just kept going on and on. One Japanese machine gun dominated the crest of the hill and repulsed all attempts to knock it out. Finally, Private First Class Gabriel Chavez rushed at it with a grenade and blew up a gun, the crew, and himself in one final effort. He was awarded a posthumous Distinguished Service Cross, again, well earned. Tanks managed to crawl to the top of the hill and began a duel with Japanese 47 millimeter anti-tank guns to the south. This is not a good thing to be a duel to have. For the first time in the month-old campaign, American guns fired directly on Shuri Castle, believed to be the enemy headquarters on Okinawa. So it's getting real. I mean, as if it hasn't already been real, Seth, to this point.
So by the end of April, 381st is down to skeleton strength. And I mean that, as much as I possibly can. They have been bled white. The entire 96th Infantry Division is absolutely exhausted and forced to deploy, as we talked about a minute ago, fresh replacements directly into the frontline foxholes, which is never a good thing to do. But when you got no choice, you got no choice, because still
Yep.
haven't thrown the Marines into the line yet. However, relief is indeed coming finally. Thank God for the 96th. Poor devils. This relief comes in the form of the Statue of Liberty, 77th ID, AD Bruce's people. They are indeed the first to face Hacksaw Ridge, such as what we have in our minds. It's the 307th Regimental Combat Team, Infantry Regimental Combat Team to be exact. Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Cooney's 1st Battalion 307 began its attack on 29 April when companies A and B used scaling ladders to get to the top of the cliff. No lie, they used freaking ladders because that's the only way they could get up there with any kind of rapidity. John, it is a steep ass cliff.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, for sure.
Is this
Yeah, like I say,
is
when you're
this like the is this like the Rangers in Normandy?
Mm-mm. No, not to
No?
that degree.
no, not to that,
Okay.
not to that degree. And again, the ridge slopes down off to the northwest. When you come up it, obviously you walk up the spine, but even there, the what do I want to say? The scarp is not as steep. It's on the eastern end that it really gets pretty steep. And so yeah, in 77th sector, using ladders pretty much is the only way to get up there directly. Yikes. Yeah, when you're
Yeah.
standing up there on that little section of ground that I showed you, as I say, if you're looking over the northern part, within 20 feet, you're looking down at the tops of trees that are underneath you. It's very, very steep.
So almost immediately, as soon as these GIs get up to the top, they come under withering fire. Again, no surprise here from Japanese pillboxes and troops that were hidden below ground in spider holes and positions that were also dug into the ground themselves. Um, Camouflage concrete and steel pillboxes open fire on these guys. These were protected by deadly fire from Japanese artillery, heavy mortars, and anti-tank guns positioned behind the escarpment. As you said this last episode, John, and I think it's important to reiterate it again. As you go further south, the elevation
Ground gets
goes
higher and higher.
up. Yeah,
Yep.
it gets higher.
Yeah, and I should just put a plug in here. I do take tours here from the World War II Museum. I go to Japan every other year, and we run a tour that goes Tokyo, Hiroshima, Kagoshima, Okinawa, and Okinawa is the ultimate stop in this tour. The first place that we take our guests is to the top of Shuri Castle because there's a beautiful set of battlements up there. If you're standing on top of Shuri Castle and you're looking off to the north, you can look down on the top of the Maeda Escarpment, Hacksaw Ridge, and just beyond that, you can then also see the top of Kakazu. And so, yes, the ground is getting higher and higher the further south that we move. So, the Japanese headquarters for 32nd Army is watching this fight developing on the Maeda Escarpment because they can see the top of it perfectly from their own positions higher up in Shuri Castle.
At night, when the GIs get up, well, when they're up there, they hang out up there. They come under fire from Japanese snipers, who, as you mentioned before, the Japanese are experts at infiltration
Yep.
tactics, and that's exactly what they start doing up here. 3rd Battalion of 307 could not even get to the top of the damn cliff. When companies K and L tried, they were forced back by heavy fire that came from enemy positions on the reverse slope of the hilltop and pillboxes on top. The fighting continued, Bill, unabated for days in this area, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And so the point that John made earlier about how small this place is, the cliff may not have been as high as represented in the movie, but the top of it was smaller than it is represented in the movie. So the GIs on top of the area, resupply was a feat in itself. Food, water, ammunition, medical supplies had to be brought up to the top of the escarpment, requiring a climb of some 300 feet up at an angle. This is not the vertical cliff side, but it's the ridge, the spine, at an angle that is somewhere between 30 and 45 degrees. The evacuation of wounded men was no small feat either. By May the 1st, the 77th put up several 50-foot ladders, yes, ladders, and cargo nets swiped from the ships offshore to resupply the men at the top and get the wounded out. But even for all of that, 2 companies were essentially stuck at the top of the ridge and unable to move forward or backward. So by May 1st, very little progress had been made. And that night, the Japanese counterattacked. The counterattack was strong enough to force what remained of B Company of the 307th Infantry Regiment to retreat from their positions. In the darkness, the GIs groped along the cliff edge for ropes, and 10 slid down and then slid down the cliff. Others simply jumped over the side to the 40-foot plateau below. Only the 60-millimeter mortars of neighboring A Company stopped the Japanese attacks. So this is, starting to get, significantly more intense.
John, you were going to say something.
No, I wasn't. I
Oh,
just, I mean,
I mean,
well,
that's
yeah, okay, yeah, okay. I'll just jump 40 feet because I'd rather have broken legs than stay up on the top of this damn thing. And I'm
And
groping
get
around in the
killed.
dark and I can't find a cargo net. And screw it, I'm out of here.
yeah,
Just
Right.
yikes.
fight or flight, baby, fight or
Yeah,
flight.
right.
So the following day, what was left of B Company was withdrawn, as was Able Company. 4.2-inch chemical mortars. I know these are not chemical weapons, so don't anybody say, yeah, it's chemical weapons on Okinawa. No, we didn't. That's what they were called. They were 4.2-inch chemical mortars, were brought up to bombard the cliff top. These are huge mortars, by the way. They're not spigot mortar size, but these are some big rounds. The mortar fires from the mortar fire from the big tubes actually does do some good. Their high explosive charges sealed four Japanese caves on the escarpment, 4 out of, God knows how many. It's,
Yeah.
75 millimeter and 105 millimeter SPs, self-propelled artillery, were brought up and they added their fire to the party. Some, and this is interesting, some were firing white phosphorus, Willie Pete, into the cave openings. In one instance, a Willie Pete shell exploded inside a cave, and the GIs watched as white smoke poured out of at least 30 other openings along the ridge area on the top of the cliff.
Yeah, and I mentioned this, yeah, in the beginning
Damn.
episode. This happened, frequently actually, and it gives you a sense for just how interconnected these defenses were inside.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah,
Goodness gracious. Talk about frustrating. That that
yeah,
that
for
is,
sure.
you got to be sitting there going like, really? How much more of this crap?
Yeah,
One of the men, and we got to talk about it, and everybody I'm sure is expecting us, but
everybody
you
knows
have
him.
to because
And there's
this
a
dude
reason.
is, yeah, he's a bad man.
He's a bad man.
One of the guys atop the escarpment was a medic from Lynchburg, Virginia, born in 1919 into a family deeply entrenched in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Desmond Doss grew up firmly believing in the commandment, thou shalt not kill. In 1942, Doss was working at Newport News Shipyard, and in 1942, he received his draft notice. Unlike other conscientious objectors, which is what he was, Doss did not refuse to do his part in the war. Quite the opposite. He volunteered to be a medic. He did not want to, it was against his religion, to carry a firearm and to kill other human beings. He wanted to save lives. Throughout his training, Doss received both verbal and physical abuse from his comrades who perceived the deeply religious man who did not want to shoot anyone a coward. Farthest thing in the world from a coward.
Mm-hmm.
Several of his senior officers tried to have Doss transferred, and one even attempted to have him court-martialed for not carrying a rifle. Instead of taking lives, Doss desired to save them. He requested and received medical training as a combat medic, and it would be in that role, Bill, that he would serve his country and, as I put in the notes, those that abused him, which is 100% accurate.
Yeah, it is, Seth. You know, we always want to do justice to the people we talk about because we know that family members are listening, as I suspect Desmond Doss's son will be listening to this episode. And this guy deserves respect. You said he was a bad man. No, I would say he's an intensely good man.
Well,
Doss first,
yes.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Doss first saw action on Guam with the 77th, where he would earn the Bronze Star for V, with V for Valor. I don't remember that being portrayed in the movie. But this is the point. This isn't Desmond's first rodeo here.
Right.
He received a second award for similar action on Leyte. So you've got Guam, you've got Leyte, and he's receiving 2 medals for heroism before Okinawa. He's part of the cargo net climb on May the 2nd and had been up with B Company the entire time. For days on end, Doss continually threw himself into enemy fire to retrieve wounded men of the company. Now, these guys, as we repeatedly say here at the top of this ridge, they weren't hundreds of yards away because the ridge wasn't as big. The top of the ridge wasn't as big as it's portrayed in the movie. That makes this even more heroic because they're much closer. This is close quarters battle almost, right?
Spitting distance.
When you stand up there, I mean, you cannot believe how small it feels. It feels like it's your living room practically. And so, yeah, the fact that he's up on top of this thing, yikes, just yikes.
Yeah, and it makes the accuracy of fire more, intense and all of that.
It's
so
terrifying.
At one point, yeah, it is. 4 men were wounded assaulting a cave. Laying in the open, the men were sure to die. Doss gets up and he runs towards them in full view of the Japanese, all the while being showered with enemy grenades. Miraculously unhurt, he pulls each of these men to safety all by himself, and that is portrayed in the movie. When the order to retreat from the escarpment came, Doss refused, as there were at least 80 men who were trapped atop the battlefield. Over the next several hours, he personally retrieved 75 wounded men, carrying some on his back as far as 100 yards, and lowered them down the cliff using a rope with a good Boy Scout bowline knot tied in the end of the rope. Yeah, on May 21st, he himself was finally wounded by grenade fragments and placed on a litter. In the middle of another attack, he crawls off the litter, and yet again, the fearless medic treated wounded men while he himself was wounded a second time, taking a 7.7 through the arm, shattering a bone. When all of the wounded men around him were treated and evacuated, he finally allows himself to be evacuated, only after fashioning a splint for his arm out of a shattered rifle stock and crawling his way back to the aid station. My goodness. This has to be one of the most heroic acts of the war. And of course, he is rightly awarded the Medal of Honor, guys.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of George Wallen from Iwo Jima. Same kind of thing. And, we always talk about the gunslingers getting up there and doing the killing and blowing the caves up and whatever the case may be, which is obviously incredibly heroic. But keep in mind, for the most part, and some medics in the Pacific and some corpsmen did carry firearms, but for the most part, especially Doss, does not carry any kind of weapon at all. He may have a knife on him to,
Yeah.
open up a shirt or something if
Bandages.
he have to, but that's it. That is it. And this dude is doing this over a period of hours to the point of absolute physical exhaustion. And then when he gets wounded, he still hasn't had enough. I mean, the
Yeah.
man was incredible,
He was a
absolutely.
giant.
And yeah, he was a giant. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the most humble human beings on the face of the freaking planet, too. Just,
Did you meet him?
I met him long, long time ago, but not long before I started at World War II Museum.
Okay.
He passed away he passed away before I started doing interviews, but I was able to meet him one time. And he was just a very quiet, soft-spoken, humble man, as was George Wallen too. And
Hmm.
God bless his soul. But yeah, I mean, just a
Yikes. Yeah.
what a
Wow.
hell of a man. What a hell of a guy.
Wow.
So despite Desmond
Unfortunately,
Doss's,
yeah,
yeah,
I was going to say, unfortunately, medics can't carry the top of a hill.
nope, nope,
Mhm.
nope. Hacksaw remained stout, to say the least. No amount of bravery, heavy artillery, or bombs seemed to be able to eliminate these people from the top of this area. But the GIs kept coming. They just kept coming. Company I managed to get to the left rear of the escarpment and began the deadly process of cleaning out caves and pillboxes on the slopes. One of these caves was found to be 3 stories deep. A demolition charge thrown into the cave mouth blew out the floor, uncovering the second and then the third level. 2 more charges and 25 gallons of gas finished this cave.
This is
That,
gross
yeah,
combat. This is just horrid. I mean,
yeah.
but that's what you got to do, right?
What was it? Yeah, it was. It was Peleliu that we were talking about, where
Mm,
they fed a fuel pipe from the
yes.
beach through like a
Mhm.
fire hose, and literally were like
Yes.
pumping gas into these caves, and then
Yeah.
same kind of thing. So the GIs of Company F, 2nd Battalion 307, were able to partially cut off the end of Hacksaw from the rear atop the escarpment. The 1st Battalion fought hand to hand with the Japanese, and Company B became involved in a hand grenade duel in which the GIs tossed grenades as fast as the human supply chain could bring them forward. It was like a bucket brigade of grenades going up. After several bloody hours, the top of the escarpment was finally cleared, and the grenade duel moved to the reverse slope. It was a frustrating business, as I put in the notes, constantly pounded by grenades and mortars. Neither side really held an advantage. And this is something I want to touch on, but we're going to get into it in depth later. One officer remembered, quote, the men would come back from to the northern side of the ridge weeping and swearing they would not go back into the fight. Yet in 5 minutes' time, those men would be back here tossing grenades as fast as they could pull the pins. Okinawa, above probably any other Pacific battle, inflicts so much mental carnage on
Yep.
the men that were there.
Yep.
And we're going to see why as the fight, divulges into absolute hell. But it more than any other place, it just wrecks the minds of a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
It's
Well, and it's on both sides too. I'll say that. Yeah, if you look at the number of casualties on the American side for combat fatigue, it's alarming, and it's going to get even worse here once the rains start, which are going to
Yep,
happen
that's what I'm
very
talking about.
shortly, which are going to make this battlefield just into a hellish quagmire. The same thing is happening to the Japanese, and intriguingly, fast forward to the post-mortem, there are a fair number of Japanese that are surrendering as well, and we
Yes.
don't see a lot of that in the Pacific either. Part of that, I think there's two things going on there. One is just the horrific nature of this battle. There's three things actually. Two, a lot of these Japanese troops, in many cases, are recent Okinawan conscripts who had just been
Mhm.
dragooned into the military and do not have the same level of motivation as your old line Japanese line infantry would have. But three, I think that even the morale within the old line Japanese army is also starting to fracture at this point in the war because the trajectory of all of these battles is just absolutely clear.
Yeah.
These are human beings too. And yeah, so both sides are suffering mightily. And yeah, just the nature of the combat here is such that there's a lot of people breaking down.
Yep. So, Bill, Hacksaw was finally surrounded, and GIs are all over the escarpment. But as we know, for the next several days, there's a lot of cleanup in there.
Yeah, there is. By the first week of May, the 7th Infantry Division had been in combat for nearly 4 weeks straight. The Japanese defenses had already been reduced one division, the 96th, to a mere shadow of what it had been on Love Day, and the replacement, the 27th, was having just as hard a time and had already been slated for relief. Buckner now had no choice but to commit the Marines, finally, who still at the stage were enjoying easy duty. The 27th's relief came on May the 1st in the shape of the United States Marine Corps 1st Division. Elements of the old breed, specifically 3-5, made their way towards the front and marched past the shuffling regiments of the 27th. Gene Sledge, who we've talked about repeatedly, most notably at Peleliu, of Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Regiment, recalled they were dead, beat, dirty, and grisly. I hadn't seen such faces since Peleliu. And so this is really incredible because Peleliu was actually the opposite, wasn't it? The Army
It's the
relieving the Marine Corps.
Yeah, it's the Army coming in. It's the 81st Infantry coming in to relieve First Mardiv that has just been gutted. And now, yeah, turnabout is fair play. It's First Mardiv coming in, and they can see these guys coming off the line. And yeah, Sledge has some really interesting passages on that.
He does. I knew a
Mm.
lot of guys in it was King Company, actually, King Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th. And one of them was a guy I mentioned earlier, and we talked about him on Peleliu too, was a guy named Sterling Mace. He lived in St. Pete Beach, Florida, but he was from Brooklyn, New York, and he talked like it too. He always sounded like Bugs Bunny to me. Hell of a guy. He did. He really did. He talked like this. But he was a great,
That's
great
funny.
guy.
Yeah.
Great guy. He was a BAR gunner in K35, like I said, and he told me, quote, he's talking about the 27th ID. He says they look like hell. They were so beat up they could barely talk. After seeing those guys, it scared the shit out of me. I knew we were going where they had been, and it scared the shit out of me, unquote. And those are his direct words. As K35 makes their way closer to the front, rifle and machine gun fire rattled in the forward area. Suddenly, and literally, as the Marines and the 27th are passing one another, this goes down. Japanese artillery began to drop all around the Marines as they ran at a trot forward. The whine of 47 millimeter canister rounds tore through the air, and men began to drop.
I didn't even know the Japanese had a canister
I didn't
round for
either.
their 47
I didn't either, but I looked into it and they did. They
It
did not
did.
use it. They did. They did not use it to the
Degree that we use 37
degree
can.
correct,
Right.
but they did indeed. Yeah, they did
Okay, well
indeed.
that's the kind of high quality history we come for, that you actually did open up the ordnance manuals and find out that they had a canister round for that, because
They
that threw me
did.
for a loop. Thank you.
They did. They did. So as these guys are coming through, obviously the canister, and which means that the Japanese, by the way, are friggin' close.
Yeah, four or
If
five
you're
hundred
shooting
yards.
what essentially means is a giant shotgun
Yeah.
at somebody, they're close. As the men raced to the top of the slope, Marines took cover amidst the rocks. The yells of corpsmen sounded everywhere, and radio calls for smoke were heard on the area, on the radio rather. Another old friend of mine who was also in K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th, Romulus Bolton Bergen, R.V. Bergen, recalled, quote, the fire came in and I yelled at the squad to dig, hit the deck, dig in, damn it, dig, dig, dig. I remember yelling over and over again. We hadn't even been on the lines for 10 minutes and everything hit the fan. I knew then that our vacation was over and we were in for it. Boy, he couldn't have been more right if he tried, because it's about to get if it wasn't bad enough,
It's getting worse.
it's
Oh yeah.
getting worse.
Oh
It's
yeah.
getting
We
worse.
took we took 2.5 hours to describe 1 month of combat. That's,
Right.
you know, it's pretty, and it's going to get worse. Yeah,
It's
that's
gonna
that's
get
tough.
worse.
Yeah,
But it'll be
it
faster though, a little, I think.
maybe,
Once we
maybe.
get through Shuri. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah,
The thing that always, is stuck in my mind when it comes to the Okinawa is this stage. And,
Yes.
that, and that's not to say anything about, degrading to the Army. God love them. I mean, we just spent, like Bill said, over 2 hours talking about these poor, unfortunate souls. But it's this stage of the campaign that always sticks out in your mind when you think about Okinawa, because as you said just a few minutes ago, this is when the heavens open.
Yes.
and it turns into this nasty,
Quagmire.
nasty, horrible place, and it just goes to
Yeah.
hell. Literally,
Yeah.
everything goes to hell, and it's unlike anything that the Marines or doggies had seen in the Pacific. It
Yeah.
just gets
It
really bad.
really, yeah, for the Pacific, we're about to experience a reversion to almost World War One trench-like
Yep.
combat. It's absolutely mind-bending, and the Marines don't know that they're in for that yet. Spoiler alert! But yeah, the rainy season is about to show up.
Yep. Mind bending and
It's
mind
going to become
breaking too.
reminiscent of the South Pacific island campaigns. And
Yeah,
so
Yeah,
we
in a
forget
lot of
how
ways.
far
Yeah.
Okinawa is from Japan,
yeah.
Yeah.
from mainland. Yep.
Very true.
Well, on that uplifting, teasery kind of note,
Hmm.
I think we should shut up. I
I
think we
think
should.
so.
I think so.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
I'm in
do.
favor of
I do
that.
indeed.
Our listeners' ears are hurting right now. So,
Yeah,
yes, we
Mm,
should probably.
and I'm
long-winded
hungry. And I'm
historian
hungry.
cheers. Yes, me too. All right.
All right. With that, we want to thank you for watching and or listening in to our conversation. Please subscribe to the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. Wherever you receive your podcast, give us a rating, review, and all that jazz. We do greatly, honestly, greatly appreciate it. Um, if you have a question or a comment, send us an email at unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, my name is Seth Parrott, and I want to thank you all very, very much for listening and or watching. John, my good friend, thanks for being here with us, and we will
Always
see
a
you
pleasure.
again very soon.
Yes, indeed.
Indeed. Bill, bring us home.
Yeah, and you to see how fascinating one of those trips to Japan would be with John. Go next year. This is Bill Tody. See you again next week.